The story begins with a guy telling the MC not to overthink it and just sign the document. Our boy gets a little hesitant and asks if all of that is really safe to do. The man slaps the table in frustration and tells him not to overthink it, since he would never scam a high school friend, explaining that he already covered protection and compound interest. The man insists the money will grow on its own and says he only reached out because he cares so much about him. The man reminds the MC that while his father's funeral was happening, he was taking work calls, and says it broke his heart to see a high school friend humiliating himself like that for his boss. Hearing the man mention his late father, the MC feels like exploding, but he can't do a thing. With no other choice, all that's left for him to do is sign the paper and hope that help is real. But all of that was just a scam, and the MC had acted like a total fool. 2 years later, in a dark apartment, the MC was throwing up in the toilet. He really regrets losing all that food he ordered after such a long time. He describes himself as an ordinary 28-year-old Korean guy living an extremely pathetic life. The scammer vanished a year ago, and now the MC survives like a ghost under a giant mountain of debt. With 5 hours left before his shift, he decides to read a bit, which is his only remaining hobby. He grabs a book from the shelf to read for just 30 minutes, this being a web novel called Dark Header. He has read this story more than 100 times and knows almost everything by heart, but it always brings something new. The guy feels very grateful because reading allows him to escape his miserable life for a few moments. Suddenly, he gets startled as he realizes something strange is happening right there. Looking to the side, he sees several dark, glowing feathers floating around the room. He gets intrigued upon realizing they are black crow feathers. All of a sudden, he starts coughing up blood, and all that blood falls directly onto the book. Feeling a terrible pain, he places his hand on his chest, not understanding what is happening to him. Right after, a purple smoke begins to rise from the book. With a pale face stained with blood, he starts regretting the sad fate of his own life. He then wonders if his life is really going to end in such a pathetic way. Just as he was trying to accept the situation, something strange begins to rise from deep within his soul. Even on the verge of fading away, the last thing he can think of is the face of that lousy scammer. The guy really regrets passing away without achieving absolutely anything in life. Suddenly, his vision completely changes, and he lets out a gasp of utter shock in the dark. He stands up startled in a luxurious bed and wonders if all of that had been just a dream. His eyes now glow intensely in a very bright, clear shade of blue. He looks around and realizes he is in a completely different and very fancy place. Extremely confused, the young man starts touching his own face to try and figure out what happened. He is surprised to see a huge, very friendly crow lying next to him on the bed. Right then, the big bird starts flapping its wings right in front of him. Several other red-eyed crows start flying around and exiting through the massive hall windows. He stays in shock and wonders what is going on as he sees that unusual scene. Looking up at the sky, he spots 3 bright moons of different colors floating together. The young man sees a flag with the symbol of 3 moons and starts suspecting where he actually is. He soon realizes that is not the reality he used to know, despite his initial confusion. A person knocks on the door calling for Prince Lan Avaran, leaving him deep in thought. He panics and shouts for them not to open the door, making up an excuse that his body feels a bit strange. On the other side, the maid gets quite startled by the prince's sudden reaction. He ends up falling flat on his back on the floor and complains about the pain in his head from the impact. The maid mentions she will come back later, while he confirms in his thoughts that he was right about the name. He realizes he ended up right inside the world of that novel he read so many times in his life. The guy realizes he is in the world of the novel Dark Header, and that he reincarnated right in the body of Lan Avaran, the 7th prince. He panics as he remembers that this prince's fate is to meet a miserable end right at the beginning of the whole story. The young man doesn't understand how this happened, lamenting that he woke up inside the novel in the body of someone so problematic. At that moment, a man wearing dark glasses formally introduces himself as Sign, calling him Your Highness. The MC gets very tense upon remembering that Sign is the 7th prince's personal secretary. Sign says he heard the prince skipped dinner and came personally to bring a meal because he was so worried. He mentions he prepared a light meal and asks if the young prince is feeling all right. The guy tries to stay calm and decides that the best option right now is to play along as the real Prince Avaran. He replies that he is already feeling a bit better, leaving Sane relieved, although the secretary finds it a little odd. Sane then orders the maid Anna to prepare the prince's meal, and she obeys immediately. He thanks her for the food but notices that the maid is trembling heavily and that the meal is extremely simple for a prince. He tries to grab the teapot to serve his own tea, startling the maid who was in charge of the task. In the middle of the confusion, the teapot slipped and spilled tea all over the table. The poor maid gets completely terrified by what just happened there. She throws herself onto the floor, desperately begging for forgiveness, leaving the MC unable to understand that extreme reaction. The guy thinks it's a total overreaction for her to make such a scene just over a little spilled tea on the floor. Suddenly, he remembers a very important detail. Prince Lan Avaran was known for being a piece of trash. In the original story, the prince used to physically abuse and even eliminate servants over any minor thing, being the worst villain at the start of the novel. Seiyan comments that he was surprised to see the prince looking so healthy and calm. The secretary says he is glad he is doing well, but apologizes for interrupting the meal to discuss business. He presents some very important budget documents and asks the young prince to sign them. The MC gets very suspicious of that story, thinking it makes no sense for a useless prince like him to have important business. Upon checking the paper, he clearly notices that the document is fake and serves only to drain the prince's budget. He remembers that Sane is only able to do this because he is related to the Empress, who holds massive influence over that entire world. The original prince was a pushover who would sign without thinking, but now he wonders if he should follow the storyline and sign it. Sane starts mocking him, asking if he somehow forgot how to sign his own name in such a surprising way. The guy gets annoyed at being ridiculed by a mere secretary and wonders why he had to reincarnate into this prince of all people. Sane continues his manipulative talk, saying the prince is miserable and needs him, insisting that he sign without overthinking it. This situation feels way too much like his sad past on Earth when he was about to sign that fake contract. The face of that smiling scammer who played him in the past pops up in his head again during that moment of pressure. He gets furious upon realizing that this current situation is no different from his old power-free life, being pushed around by others. With a determined look, he firmly decides that he is not going to live like this anymore, no matter what. He stares down the secretary and says he took a look at the numbers and that it seems like an obvious waste of the palace budget. Sane gets caught off guard and admits he didn't expect the prince to notice that, confessing he really underestimated him. He tries to change the subject, saying the food will get cold, and promises to review the numbers as soon as the prince signs everything. Sane insists once more for him to sign without thinking about anything, but a loud noise cuts the secretary off. The sudden noise startles the maid, who curls up waiting for the worst to happen right there in the hall. The teapot and the plates end up shattered on the ground, spreading liquid and broken pieces everywhere. The prince says coldly that his hand slipped, feeling confident because he knows every single detail of that novel he read so many times. He knows that the Empress doesn't even actually know Sane, and the frightened secretary asks what the prince is doing. The prince makes a dismissive hand gesture, leaving Sane completely speechless and even more confused. The secretary starts breaking into a cold sweat as he realizes the prince's attitude completely changed from one moment to the next. He doesn't know how he ended up there, but he doesn't plan on going down quietly and decides to pin the incident on the secretary. Tired of living a life full of failures, he decides to use all his knowledge of the novel and his royal authority to change his fate. Sane gets extremely furious and tense when the young prince coldly asks why he is still just standing there. The young prince points straight to the floor and bluntly notes that the hall carpet ended up completely ruined. He coldly orders Saiyan to clean up the mess, determined to use whatever means necessary to survive in that place. He recalls that in this fantasy world, members of the imperial family are viewed practically as gods. All imperial nobles possess bright blonde hair and unique special abilities, serving as divine symbols of power. However, Sine remembers with deep anger that the seventh prince was the only major trash exception in that perfect family. Sane thinks with pure disgust that the prince is an idiot with a terrible temper and ugly black hair that doesn't look royal at all. He gets even more irritated remembering that he paid bribes just to end up working under a useless guy like him. Nevertheless, swallowing his pride, the secretary bends down to pick up the scattered papers while the prince just watches. Sane finishes cleaning the floor in anger and informs the prince that he has completed the entire cleanup job. When the secretary tries to take his leave, the prince throws another glass on the floor, startling the man. Cian asks in shock what that means, and the young man replies that he took way too long cleaning and needs more practice. With his eyes glowing in an intimidating red shade, he coldly orders the secretary to clean it all up again, and faster this time. Saiyan finds the prince's behavior very weird and starts worrying about how he is going to explain all of this to the Empress. The secretary thinks with contempt that the guy wouldn't have the nerve to talk to the Empress, deciding it's best to avoid future trouble. The prince then points at the maid and orders her to cover her ears immediately, leaving her confused. He warns that if she hears even a single word, he will make her work without fingers, making her agree out of sheer panic. Terrified of facing a horrific punishment, the girl covers her ears with her hands as hard as she can. The prince starts speaking about something very serious with the secretary, but the words come out completely muffled to anyone on the outside. As the young prince speaks with authority, Sane begins to break into a cold sweat and gets visibly tense. The secretary's face turns ghostly pale, as if he had just seen a phantom or a corpse right in front of him. Later, the maids gossip among themselves while working, commenting that the 7th prince has been acting very strange lately. Anna says that the prince has gotten much scarier and wonders in fear if she will even make it through the next year alive. They agree that at least it's a relief he barely leaves the palace lately, avoiding running into them. One of the servants reminds Anna that she was supposed to be cleaning today, making the girl panic as she realizes she forgot her duty. Meanwhile, inside a grand library bathed in sunlight, the MC appreciates the pleasant weather of the day. He thinks he needs to avoid raising suspicions while pretending to be the prince, though he notices the servants are scared out of their minds. The guy feels satisfied because Sane hasn't shown up since that day, saving him from having to confront him aggressively again. He feels relaxed because he still has 1 year until the main story begins and 3 years before his tragic final fate takes place. He fondly remembers when he found the worn-out book in the library, showing how much he loved reading that story in the past. Since it will still take a long time for the novel's original hero to show up, the guy decides to just enjoy his downtime. As he admires the beautiful sky through the window, he thinks it would be amazing to have wings to fly and see everything from above. Suddenly, he feels a violent shock through his entire body and freezes completely in total shock. The teacup in his hands drops to the floor and shatters into several pieces. The guy falls to his knees on the floor, feeling an unbearable pain, as if his whole body were suddenly burning up. He realizes this feeling is different from anything he has ever felt, feeling as though he were catching fire from the inside out. Outside the door, the maid Anna asks if she can come in, while the prince desperately cries out for help in his thoughts. Upon entering the room and not seeing the feared prince anywhere, Anna lets out a huge sigh of relief. She walks a bit and gets deeply shocked upon spotting the shards of the precious teacup broken on the floor. The girl regrets the waste, thinking that if she sold that fancy cup, her family could support themselves for a whole month. In the middle of her thoughts about the broken china, she feels that something strange is happening right behind her. A huge crow with glowing red eyes suddenly appears from behind the curtain and flies toward the girl. The bird lands calmly on the hall floor, leaving the maid very confused by its presence inside. She picks up the crow in her arms and warns it with concern, saying that room belongs to a very dangerous person. The crow itself gets an expression of total shock upon realizing what actually just happened to it. The MC realizes in horror that somehow he ended up turning from a prince into a simple black crow. Anna says that if the prince catches them there, they will both get wiped out, while the crow desperately tries to yell that he himself is the prince. She tosses the bird out the open window so it can escape, completely ignoring his mental orders not to let go under any circumstances. The little bird plummets from a massive height down the castle tower and falls into absolute panic. As he drops at high speed toward the trees down below, he is certain he is going to perish from the impact of the fall. Amid total panic, he tries to think of what to do to survive and wonders if he should try to use his own wings. With massive willpower and focused on not losing his life in that place no matter what, he tries to spread his wings to start flying. The crow finally manages to glide in the air right above the ground, feeling quite surprised by his own feat. He flaps his wings hard and looks at himself, still unable to believe what is happening right there. He celebrates heavily for actually flying through the blue sky, but soon wonders if he will be able to turn back into a human again. The new prince turned into a crow now flies over the grand imperial castle under the mysterious glow of the 3 moons in the sky. Luckily, the guy manages to return to human form and decides to test the transformation a few more times to be absolutely sure. He realizes he now has the incredible ability to turn into a crow at any moment, needing only to imagine the desire. The MC wonders why he gained this power, considering if it might be a curse from that crow from the first day. He locks the room door tightly, aware that this mysterious power must never be discovered by anyone in the palace. He worries because this ability never existed in the original novel, and any slip-up on his part could completely alter the plot. A voice calls out to him, warning that the night ritual will begin shortly and that he needs to get ready to leave immediately. The young man grows thoughtful and serious, realizing that the big day of the ritual had finally arrived for him. The emperor and the siblings gather monthly for the ritual that serves as a succession test, though the 7th prince stands 0 chance. The guy finds it incredible to see all of that in person while sitting at the lowest and farthest spot at the massive imperial table. He observes the bright blonde nobles of the empire and feels insignificant, looking like just an ordinary crow next to so much beauty. One of the princes calls the MC a shameless idiot, leaving the guy calm as he tries to identify who the attacker is. It's Celos Avaran, the 17-year-old 8th prince, an arrogant half-brother who doesn't show the slightest respect for him. While the half-brother yells angrily, calling him deaf, the MC remembers that both are just extra villains destined to disappear. The first princess interrupts the fight with authority, demanding good behavior in front of the emperor, making Celos apologize instantly. The MC recognizes the first princess and realizes that the other noble siblings are all sitting strictly in order of rank. He recalls that the magical power called Manus is revealed by the bright hair color of each member of the powerful imperial family. On the other hand, Prince Avaran has dark hair and is the only one without this magical power, explaining why his personality was so twisted. At that moment, imposing footsteps begin to echo through the ritual hall, announcing the arrival of the most powerful person in that world. A man with long, glowing white hair enters majestically into the room under the watchful eyes of everyone present. The entry of His Majesty the Emperor is announced triumphantly, bringing an aura of glory, conviction, and absolute power with him. The feared emperor demands that the measurement test begin immediately without any kind of time wasted by his children. He points to the blue stone slab, explaining that it is an ancient relic capable of reacting when magical power is infused into it. One of the princes places his hand over the ancient blue artifact so the relic can start measuring the intensity of his Manus power. An incredibly bright column of blue light rises from the slab toward the ceiling, showing very clearly the strength of his magic. The nobles are impressed by the height reached by the glowing light, although the MC feels that something is a bit off there. The emperor removes his hand from the magic stone and calls the next challenger who wishes to test their energy to step forward. The 7th prince just watches everything in complete silence, keeping a very serious and focused expression on his face. The first prince steps up with a confident smile, asking the emperor for permission to perform his measurement test. He knows that usually only the first prince participates, as the magical strength ranking rarely changes once measured. The first prince places his hand on the artifact to periodically display the immense size of his magical power before all members present. With that demonstration, he makes it clear to everyone present who stands at the top of the hierarchy and who will be the true next emperor. Suddenly, the first prince lets out a choked groan of extreme pain, and his confident expression turns into complete panic. The other siblings jump up startled from their chairs upon seeing their older brother suffering a collapse right then and there. He begins coughing up a terrifying amount of blood from his nose and mouth, horrifying everyone present with the terrible scene. While everyone falls into complete desperation and screams for a doctor urgently, the MC remains totally calm in his seat. Knowing that the heir is going to pass away shortly while spitting blood, he realizes clearly that the main story events have begun now. Manus is the energy that grants unique abilities to each noble, varying in completely different ways for each family member. While the late first prince mastered the power of water, the second prince controls the overwhelming power of fire in his hands. The result of the first prince's test was predictable, and his magic was only supposed to have slightly surpassed the average measurement level. However, everything went wrong much sooner than expected, causing the terrible incident with the first prince bleeding in front of everyone. The guy realizes in shock that in the original story, this poisoning was only supposed to happen half a year later, before the novel's hero shows up. The most intriguing thing to him is why the 7th prince, who was unable to use magic, managed to turn into a crow all of a sudden. He gets very suspicious of whether the arrival of this unprecedented power right after his reincarnation is really just a mere coincidence. On top of his new ability, the MC notes that the physical raw strength of the prince's body is incredibly monstrous and scary. A blonde prince confronts him angrily, mocking him for being a useless guy unable to use magic and asking why he dared to show up there. The MC replies with an iconic smile that if he were a real assassin, the other guy would already be gone without even noticing. The blonde guy gets shocked upon realizing the young man managed to break into the room of the future emperor, which has one of the best defenses in the empire. The blonde prince gets extremely enraged and vents his anger by smashing objects on the floor with violent punches. The MC reflects that everything was completely normal until that morning, with no clue that something so severe was going to happen today. However, looking at his own hand emitting a mysterious magical energy, he stands completely stunned by what he is seeing. The blonde prince drops to the floor on his knees, feeling a terrible agony throughout his whole body and groaning in pain. He realizes in shock that every time he tries to use his magic, his body burns, fearing he will never be able to use his power again. He staggers, refusing to accept this. After all, he is the first prince and the future emperor of the Avaran Empire. The blonde guy tries to convince himself that his body is superior to the others and that this will definitely pass soon. He tries to calm down on the couch, but a mysterious voice appears telling him to drop that hookah pipe if he wants to stay alive. Completely terrified, the prince turns around quickly and demands to know who the intruder standing in the shadows of his room is. The MC appears holding the broken piece of the hookah pipe with ease, showing he possesses scary physical strength. The first prince mocks him upon realizing the intruder is just the seventh prince, whom he calls a magicless, useless guy. The young man replies calmly with a smile, saying that if he really were an assassin, the prince would have been gone a long time ago. He points out that he managed to break in without leaving a trace into the room of the heir, who supposedly has one of the top security setups in the empire. The heir asks furiously how he got in and what trick he used, and the young man replies casually that he just climbed the outer wall. The prince refuses to believe that due to the height of the tower, but the MC says his belief is not the main issue right now. The guy asks how the prince is feeling, noting that the imperial doctor must have lied when saying everything was fine. With a mocking expression, the MC lets out a short laugh, making the air even more tense. Suddenly, the first prince starts laughing hysterically and loudly, trying to hide his panic and fear. The heir says he finally understood the situation and ironically praises the unusual cleverness of the seventh prince. He accuses the young man of poisoning him in secret just to negotiate a pardon once he becomes the new emperor. The heir says that if that was his plan, it was a terrible mistake, calling him a foolish younger brother with massive arrogance. The MC fires back coldly, saying that in 1 week he will beg to pass away, as he will start bleeding from his eyes and ears. Hearing this terrible revelation about the poison's effects, the first prince freezes in utter terror and asks what. The guy sits on the couch in an elegant way and makes it clear that he didn't plan any of this and didn't use any trick against him. He warns that the prince's health will drop fast until he passes away bleeding, confessing that he still doesn't know who the real culprit is. He emphasizes that the only certainty he has is that the heir needs to listen very carefully to everything he says next. The first prince swallows hard upon hearing that this is his last and only chance to stay alive. The MC, already transformed into a crow, celebrates that the heir is a coward, just like in the novel, and didn't send anyone to follow him. He plans to use the first prince's situation to his advantage to manipulate him according to his wishes for now. The guy finds his ability to fly surprisingly useful and handy, allowing him to travel to far more places than before. While flying through the night in the rain, he begins planning his next destination now that he is out of the palace. The little crow dives at high speed amid the night storm to launch his secret plan. The next day, under a beautiful sunny sky, the palace maids gather in worry, not knowing what to do. Anna says in fear that the prince hasn't eaten for 2 full days and that there isn't the slightest sound coming from his room. She falls into total panic upon remembering that if something happens to royalty, the servants responsible will be executed on the spot. Desperate, she starts pounding on the room door, yelling for the prince and asking if he is okay inside. The door suddenly swings open, and the prince appears calm, asking the reason for all that scandalous noise. From the sudden scare, Anna ends up tripping and falling face first onto the floor, dropping the entire food tray she was carrying. The hot soup spreads across the carpet and hits the young prince's expensive shoes directly. He looks at the scene with a serious and tired expression, staring down at the poor servant who is terrified out of her mind. Anna starts crying desperately and begging for forgiveness, saying she was only worried about his well-being. While the servant stammers in panic through tears, the prince says coldly that she didn't just cause an unnecessary commotion. He points out that she ruined the carpet and his shoes, and the girl begs desperately for him to spare at least her family. To her surprise, the prince just tells her to forget about it, ordering her to clean everything up in 5 minutes and leave. He forbids her from coming near without being called, thinking all that life-or-death drama is an overreaction and hoping to avoid hassles. Time passes peacefully, and the sky remains very clear and sunny over the entire imperial kingdom. The story moves forward 1 month after the first prince's incident of collapsing and coughing up blood during the ritual. A tense rumor begins to spread in secret through the palace that the first prince and future emperor had lost his powers. Facing this, the other princes and princesses begin whispering that a golden opportunity for the throne has finally surfaced. To silence the rumors, the heir begs the emperor to move up the hunting tournament by 6 months, just like in the novel. The guy feels relieved to see events following the novel, but worries if the changes affected the main hero out there. On the day of the Grand Imperial Hunting Tournament, he hopes to be lucky enough to meet the original hero and hand over the item to him. He plans to just wait for the right moment, but gets interrupted by the arrogant Celos calling him a bug right there in front of everyone. Selos mocks him, saying an all-black horse suits a dark bastard, while the guy worries he might be even more impulsive than in the novel. The MC decides to ignore him because he has bigger things to handle today, leaving Selos furious for being completely brushed off. He smiles while petting the black horse, saying he much prefers this animal over a flashy, showy golden horse. Looking ahead, the guy notices with satisfaction that they have finally reached the destination spot. He notes that from that point forward lies the entrance to the dangerous imperial forest. Before them stands the imposing Tower of Genesis, where the opening ceremony of the tournament takes place every year. He knows that as soon as the first prince finishes performing the ceremony, the hunting tournament will begin right after. The guy thinks suspiciously that it is actually less of a tournament and much more of a cruel political spectacle among nobles. The emperor orders the first prince to prepare for the opening ceremony, and the heir agrees immediately. The blonde-haired brother says he is happy to see him well and asks if he has already chosen his wish, leaving the guy confused about who Dido is. He explains that he is referring to the wish granted by the emperor to the winner, flattering his brother and saying he will definitely win. The opening ceremony serves precisely for the heir to display his colossal magical power in front of all the nobles present. The nobles whisper excitedly to witness his power, although some timidly mention the rumors of the recent incident. The heir walks up the stairs tense and sweating, thinking angrily that he really hopes the seventh prince's advice wasn't a bluff. The MC just watches it all from afar with a subtle, knowing smile, knowing exactly what is going to happen next. The first prince channels his energy furiously, swearing he will eliminate the guy in the most painful way possible if he tricked him. The guy notices the extreme stiffness of the first prince and casually thinks that Rasha shouldn't be so nervous. The MC thinks to himself that if Rasha followed his instructions carefully, something very entertaining is about to go down right there. A huge and overwhelming wave of blue magic energy erupts from the air, lighting up the entire area intensely. The colossal storm of magic spreads rapidly across the entire Tower of Genesis, leaving all the spectators stunned. The blue magic wind begins to swirl with extreme violence around the structure, creating a full-blown energy whirlwind. The energy storm becomes increasingly dense and strong, blowing with force that is simply brutal and overwhelming. The nobles try to protect themselves with difficulty, yelling in panic so no one gets swept away by that violent whirlwind. With great composure and authority, one of the princes orders everyone present to fall back immediately to shield themselves from the storm. Rasha appears with his eyes glowing intensely, stating with immense pride that he is the first prince of the empire. He shouts his own name with fury and determination, channeling all his remaining energy to complete the opening ritual. The heir bellows with all his strength that he is the one destined to become the supreme emperor, unleashing a massive magic attack. His immense magic takes the form of a gigantic, terrifying blue beast that flies over the entire hunting tournament area. The colossal magic creature rises toward the sky, ripping through the clouds and creating a visual show that is simply unbelievable. Little by little, the massive energy storm begins to clear in the sky, calming the violent gale over the tournament area. The entire crowd of nobles stares at the sky in complete and absolute silence, totally jaw-dropped by what they just witnessed. One of the commanders comments in awe about the unbelievable magnitude of the magical power belonging to the kingdom's imperial family. Rasha raises his fist in victory to the enthusiastic cheers of the crowd, who hail the first crown prince. Rasha remembers when the guy handed him a stone and told him to channel his magic there, making the heir think it was a joke. The MC explained that the stone would absorb the polluted energy, coldly warning that he could just pass away if he didn't want the treatment. He added that he had zero interest in saving him against his own will, leaving the heir completely out of options. He reflects with satisfaction that this bought him time, thinking that using that special item from the middle of the novel ahead of time wouldn't be a problem. Suddenly, the secretary Sane reappears in the tournament path, trembling and exhausted, calling out to the guy respectfully. He brings the heavy backpack that the MC had left in his care, and the prince comments that he finally made it. The guy thinks with contempt that Sane is incapable of handling simple tasks, asking if he brought the backpack without messing with anything inside. Sane curses inwardly for surviving the wild horse, confessing he gave him that wild animal on purpose to hurt the prince. A loud hunting horn begins to blow across the surroundings, marking the official start of the imperial tournament activities. The emperor raises his hand majestically and announces that from that exact moment, the hunts are authorized to begin. The imperial hunting tournament finally kicks off, and the entire army of knights dashes off toward the deep forest. Some noble knights debate excitedly about the chance to win and claim a wish, though others recall that royalty always takes the victory. The guy watches everyone rush and decides to keep a low profile so as not to draw attention, as winning the tournament isn't his goal right now. His real objective there is to find the former commander of the Imperial Knights, and a warrior asks Talon his thoughts on the ritual. The young man with glasses named Talon replies enthusiastically that the heir's display of magic truly felt like the power of a god. The bearded knight opines that the Emperor's true intent with the ritual was to break the noble's spirit, startling Talon with his boldness. Talon asks him in fear to only utter such blasphemies when he is alone, but the commander guarantees no one nearby is listening. The bearded duke says thoughtfully that there is a reason he is still alive and breathing at his age, at least for now. The MC moves forward through the Imperial Forest, knowing that the entire massive hunting area is divided into 3 main zones. He analyzes the map showing the small animal zone at the entrance, followed by the medium animal zone, with the large animal zone in the back. He remembers that the first prince used to gift the emperor a golden fox, but the novel never detailed where to find it. That was the main reason he had explored the huge forest in crow form nights ago, trying to map out the rare golden fox. He figures out that the fox lives near the lake to the southwest. As the story mentioned, the hunter washed his hands in the water after the hunt. He tells the horse to go ahead and wait for the right moment, sometimes feeling like the animal understands everything he says. The guy feels relieved that Sane brought the backpack successfully, planning to hand over the important item inside to the Duke. Suddenly, the black horse comes to a sharp halt and begins whinnying in fear, grabbing the young man's attention. The MC tries to calm the frightened animal, which adamantly refuses to keep moving forward through the forest. He feels a strong tremor in the ground and wonders in fear what on earth is happening right there at that moment. He asks the horse why it stopped so suddenly, asking if it happens to be sick or having some kind of issue. He suspects the animal might have spotted some dangerous or threatening beast hidden nearby in the bushes. Suddenly, a terrible thought crosses his mind, and the guy starts getting extremely worried. He looks at the horse walking slowly and wonders if the heavy backpack filled with manus stones is what's tiring the animal out. He scolds the horse, telling it to stop being stubborn, arguing that other animals pull carts while it complains over a single backpack. Annoyed, he threatens to tell the stable master to starve the horse if it keeps acting with so much stubbornness and attitude. The wild horse neighs furiously and kicks the air hard, throwing the young prince right off its back. The animal takes off running wild into the forest, leaving the MC sitting on the ground alone with the heavy backpack. Watching the horse disappear among the trees, he realizes the pathetic situation he ended up in and curses in frustration. In another part of the woods, the Duke and Talon comment that normally the deer and wolf hunt should have been a success by this time. The bearded knight regrets their bad luck, noting that today is simply not going their way. He reflects melancholically that old age has finally caught up, noting that he served as shield and sword his whole life but can't stop time. Talon smiles and kindly asks him not to talk like that, reminding the seasoned warrior that he is already a living legend of the Empire. Talon praises the endless military feats of the former commander, but the Duke just counters by saying today he is just a retired old man. The Duke asks if Talon has ever seen the Imperial family up close, and the young man replies he only saw them from afar like earlier today. The veteran explains that he will only understand true Imperial power when he faces them directly face to face one day. He recalls riding in a carriage, explaining that their family protected the imperial gods and the beautiful capital city for 1,000 years. In the past, he used to tell his young son that he should take his place one day and take pride in always being loyal to the imperial crown. He pointed proudly to the family's merchant group out the window, which exclusively supplied goods to royalty. But a sudden loud noise coming from the carriage abruptly interrupts the cheerful conversation they were having in the past. The commander stepped down, annoyed, asking what was happening, and the driver apologized, saying something got caught in the wheel. The driver broke into a cold sweat and begged his master to go back inside the carriage, promising to clean up the mess right away. Looking at the street floor, the commander was met with the tragic sight of a poor child run over and lifeless. Fresh blood dripped horrifyingly straight from the large wooden wheel of the family's luxurious carriage. He was informed that the victim was just a wanderer who tried to steal tributes meant for royalty. Inside the temple, the commander observed the scene with sadness, knowing that kind of tragedy was unfortunately a common sight around there. The little son tried to peek out the window, asking what was going on and saying he wanted to get off the carriage too. The father yelled desperately, telling the boy not to step out of the vehicle under any circumstances, scaring the little kid. He quickly climbed back in and hugged his son, repeating shakily that he shouldn't look at the terrible scene outside. Heartbroken with remorse, the father lied, saying that whatever was outside was absolutely nothing important. In the present, the Duke walks mournfully through the forest, recalling that the poor run-over child wasn't even 10 years old. He wonders melancholically if there is so much darkness, even under the rule of an empire considered so noble and divine. Talon rushes him, saying they have no time to lose and need to at least save the Duke's family honor in the tournament. The Duke apologizes and says they should get moving, revealing that by coincidence he knows a nearby spot where the Golden Fox lives. Meanwhile, the MC runs on foot carrying the heavy backpack and curses, swearing he will roast that stubborn horse when he gets back. He feels frustrated that he can't turn into a crow due to the bag's weight, fearing he'll lose the Duke's trail if he continues on foot. He recalls his investigations as a crow, aware that even the small animal zone is quite dangerous and packed with beasts. Suddenly, some bushes start rustling near him, leaving the guy tense and ready for a creature to pop out. He curses himself for not bringing any weapon out of pure laziness, not knowing if he should ditch the precious backpack to escape. He decides he'll run if things get dangerous, but suddenly notices a flying rock and remembers seeing a black horse running from afar. The rock flies at high speed and hits the poor guy with glasses right in the face as he was standing nearby. Lan Averin stands completely shocked by the scene and begins suspecting who the owner of that colorful hair might be. From afar, the Duke shouts in concern, calling for Talon and asking if he is okay after hearing all that noise. Looking closely at the blue-green hair of the knocked-out guy, Lan Averin is certain that he is Duke Fetus's assistant. The MC panics upon confirming that the guy knocked out on the ground really is Talon Krissa. Lan Averin realizes he is in deep trouble, as he never imagined he would end up running into the assistant in such a disastrous way. He knows very well that the Duke is a legendary war hero and the former commander of the Imperial Knights. That man is the powerful Duke Agony Fetus, who in the future will train the hero who turns the Empire upside down. Hiding behind a tree, Lan Averin sweats nervously from bumping into him right there, something that was never supposed to happen. None of that was part of the original plan, which was to reach the Golden Fox's habitat first and accuse the Duke of stealing his catch. The plan was to slap a silly punishment on him, like making him carry a bag of rocks in the tournament, but everything blew up. Now the MC is in total panic, not knowing what to do since the situation has spiraled completely out of his control. Meanwhile, the Duke inspects the stone on the ground and concludes that someone big threw it at them on purpose. The seasoned warrior begins suspecting that an assassin might be in the forest trying to ambush them. Talon begins groaning in pain as he regains consciousness, calling out to the Duke with great difficulty. The Duke asks if the assistant is waking up and tells him to immediately share everything he can remember. Lan Averin panics, remembering that the Fetus family is the most powerful in the Empire, and if they learn of the attack, the blame will land on him. Still dizzy and scared, Talon prepares to reveal to his lord exactly what he managed to see before the blow. Panic takes over the MC, who asks himself repeatedly what he is going to do now that the situation has gotten so much worse. Talon remains on the ground, with his face bruised and bleeding from the terrible impact of the rock. Talon apologizes to the Duke for being caught off guard, leaving the veteran relieved that he is okay. The Duke asks him to speak up if he remembers anything, but suddenly hears a suspicious noise coming from among the trees. With an extremely sharp gaze, the experienced warrior focuses all his attention toward the suspicious sound. Seeing their distraction, Lan Averin takes the chance to make a break for it and try to run as far as possible from there. The Duke spots the escape, tells the assistant to wait there, and immediately sprints after the intruder to catch him. A fast chase begins through the dense woods, with quick footsteps echoing through that whole section of the forest. Lan Averin is already wiped out from fatigue and complains that hauling that heavy backpack is draining all his strength. Still, he thinks he ran pretty far, and that an old man at that age would be easy to lose in the forest. To his surprise, the Duke pops up right behind him with his sword drawn, making the guy shocked by the retiree's stamina. The warrior demands that he identify himself and warns he won't get away, leaving the MC desperate as he sees he's about to get caught. He considers dropping the backpack and turning into a crow to escape, wishing deeply that Black Horse were right there. But in that desperate moment, he decides the best thing to do is simply try to run even faster. The guy intensely wishes he could run faster to escape the veteran's relentless pursuit. He makes one last mental push, wishing his speed would increase so he could save himself from danger. The Duke gets surprised seeing the intruder suddenly speed up and that even his silhouette seems to have changed. The veteran gets frustrated thinking his own vision is failing and pushes harder to try to catch up with him. He reaches an empty clearing and realizes, quite puzzled, that he completely lost sight of the target along the way. While running away, Lan Averin feels his body unusually lighter and wonders if he turned into a crow without noticing. He hears the sound of running hooves and wonders if that stubborn black horse decided to come back to help him out. The guy focuses his eyes on the surrounding landscape, trying to understand what exactly is happening to him at that moment. He stays completely in disbelief upon seeing the black horse rearing up right in front of him in the middle of that forest. In another part of the woods, firm footsteps of elegant boots echo across the green grass ground. The first prince, Rasya, shows up impressed and asks his brother if he really managed to hunt that creature all by himself. In front of the giant body of a downed beast, the eighth prince, Kelos, replies by asking if his brother doesn't believe him. Rasya says that first place in the hunting tournament is already his, and asks if he has already decided what wish he will ask from the emperor. Kelos flashes a very dark smile and replies mysteriously that he already has something very specific in mind to ask for. Back to the MC, he appears sitting on the ground, leaning against a large tree, letting out a long sigh of relief. Lan Avaran puts his hands on his head in utter desperation, lamenting that now he is completely ruined. The guy looks at his own empty hands and realizes he ended up losing his valuable backpack of stones during the desperate escape. Lan Avaran rolls on the ground in pure frustration, complaining that he had to lose the single most important item of his perfect plan. Disheartened and out of energy, the MC simply lies flat on his back on the grass and stares at the sky while trying to calm down. He realizes that staying there feeling sorry for himself won't solve a thing and decides the best move is to retrace his steps to look for the backpack. Meanwhile, in another part of the woods, Talon wakes up and sees the Duke approaching, asking if he had already returned from the search. The experienced veteran asks if his head feels better, and the assistant replies that he still feels a bit lightheaded, but is fine. Talon wants to know what happened, and the Duke confesses ashamed that he lost the intruder, doubting if the target was too fast or if he just got old. The assistant spots a backpack on the ground and asks what that is, and the Duke explains he found it tossed in the middle of some bushes on the way back. Talon thinks the bag looks pretty expensive and gets very confused upon realizing it is packed with ordinary rocks inside. Suddenly, Lan Avaran pops out from behind a tree and says, kind of awkwardly, that maybe someone was just playing a bad joke. The Duke and the assistant get a big scare when the guy shouts, pointing directly at the backpack that was in their hands. Talon and the Duke immediately recognize the guy and stand amazed upon realizing they are standing before the seventh prince himself. The two quickly drop to their knees with the utmost respect possible, greeting the seventh prince in a very formal manner. The Duke asks respectfully if that backpack belongs to him, and Lan Avaran pretends to be surprised as he says he finally found his lost bag. The prince scowls and asks in a very harsh tone of voice how his belongings ended up with them and if they had stolen the backpack. The Duke denies it instantly and explains, all breaking a sweat, that he would never do that, stating he merely found the object by chance while passing the bushes. The guy counters, saying anyone would make up that excuse to avoid punishment, making the veteran swear on his own life and family honor. Lan Avaran asks mockingly why the assistant is bleeding, and the Duke tries to explain that it was just an unexpected accident. Talon remains in absolute silence, breaking into a cold sweat and staring at the prince with a very frightened and anxious expression. The MC recalls the exact moment he threw the heavy rock that hit the poor glasses-wearing assistant right in the face. He starts imagining if the young assistant will end up connecting the dots and accusing the prince himself of throwing that rock. Without thinking twice, Lan Avaran steps forward quickly and grabs Talon by the hair aggressively, leaving the Duke completely frozen. The prince says with arrogance that a mere subordinate should never dare interrupt a royal conversation, accusing him of being ill-mannered. He keeps holding the guy and asks if the Duke could lend him a sword to fix the problem in case the young man's head keeps glitching. Talon falls into absolute panic and starts stuttering out of pure fear, feeling the terrible pressure of being in the hands of the feared prince. The Duke begs for mercy and promises he will punish the assistant severely, making the prince smile and praise the veteran's admirable loyalty. Lan Avaran cruelly taunts the Duke, calling him a royal dog who doesn't even care about seeing his own assistant suffer. The experienced warrior is forced to swallow that terrible insult whole, feeling a deep rage grow inside himself. The prince continues the cruel provocation, saying he is certain the Duke's son will also grow up to become an equally obedient dog. He hands over the heavy backpack and says that since fate brought them together there, he will entrust the safekeeping of that object to the Duke from today on. With a terrifying gaze glowing in red, Lan Avaran orders that he must not let the bag leave his side even after death. The guy asks authoritatively if he understood the message, leaving the Duke completely tense and motionless before such a threat. With no other option than to accept the humiliation, the veteran bows his head and replies that he will obey His Highness's honorable order. Lan Avaran says goodbye, wishing them a good hunt, and leaves happily, feeling relieved to finally be free from the weight of the rock backpack. He thinks to himself that his acting was terrible, confessing he feels sorry for Talon, but justifying that he needed to plant that seed of doubt. Talon drops to his knees crying and asks for forgiveness, but the Duke tells him to be thankful he walked away in one piece and orders the guy to go home and rest. The assistant looks at his master with a dark expression and reveals that he just remembered exactly who threw that rock at him. Talon states without any hesitation that the culprit behind that entire attack was the seventh prince. The young man explains he didn't recognize him right away, but the Duke interrupts him rudely, telling him to shut his mouth and not say another word. The MC recalls that in the original story, the Duke would only rebel during the following year's tournament after the tragic passing of his son. Because of that, Lan Avaran knows that if he wants to move up his rebellion to this current tournament, he'll need to create a very strong trigger to push him. Meanwhile, Rasia comments smilingly to Chilos that his wish to the Emperor will be permission to develop the entire area around the temple. Chilos displays a cruel expression and agrees, stating he intends to clear out all the wanderers infesting the capital like parasites. Lan Aviran knows that this hatred and cruel attitude will serve as the perfect reason to make the Duke rebel against the crown for good. The Duke is shown serious and deep in thought, quietly hauling the massive luggage packed with rocks that the prince forced him to carry. The MC reflects that the inevitable fate of that veteran is to raise his banner and lead a rebellion against the imperial family. As the sun begins to set on the horizon, a crow flies rapidly, slicing through the skies and diving toward the forest. The wind sways the bush leaves in a more isolated spot of the imperial forest. Lan Avaran steps out from behind the leaves and brushes off his clothes, hoping no one saw him coming down from the skies in his crow form. He walks toward the camp and reflects that he felt like a true villain for doing that to the Duke, but remembers that he actually is the villain. The guy plans his next moves for when the tournament wraps up, but suddenly spots someone unexpected waiting for him at the camp. First, Princess Mentil Avaran appears unexpectedly in the forest, smiling elegantly upon spotting the MC walking alone around there. Lan Avaran gets a huge scare and gets tense upon realizing he had the bad luck of bumping right into the first princess in that spot. The MC greets her formally, but she asks him to relax, reminding him that when it comes down to it, they are blood siblings. She asks where he left his horse, and Lan makes up on the spot that he preferred to walk on foot to get some fresh air. The princess looks at him in a very strange way, and coldly confesses that she can't understand that attitude. Mentil asks why her own blood brother would be lying shamelessly to her face about the animal's whereabouts. Lan Aviran plays dumb and starts sweating nervously, asking what exactly she means by that suspicion. She reveals that she saw his black horse wandering alone with no owner in the West Forest, learning from the servants that the animal was his. The guy makes up that he ordered the horse put down, justifying that any animal disobeying the imperial family deserves to be put out. He bows, pretending remorse, saying he felt deeply ashamed to admit he had lost the horse in the forest. Mental tells him to lift his head, teasing that he is making it look like she wants to punish her own younger brother. She says she is relieved he returned safely and notes that if he needs another horse, he can ask her whenever he wants. The MC knows very well that Mental is an extremely dangerous and tough person to handle, as no one can read her mind. He wonders curiously why she left so peacefully and if her mysterious ability doesn't work against him. As night falls over the tournament camp, a new conversation full of bizarre explanations begins inside one of the tents. The tournament doctor finds the story unbelievable that Talon supposedly tripped and hit his head full force against a giant rock. The doctor comments that he has seen every type of injury, but it's his first time seeing someone get so beaten up over a single rock. The Duke asks how long it will take for him to recover, and the doctor warns that the injury is serious and requires a week of rest. Talon panics upon learning he'll have to sit out the entire tournament and begs to keep working by his lord's side. The Duke calms the guy down, saying his health comes first, and guarantees that he and Jack will handle the rest of the competition. Hearing his master's sweet words, Talon accepts the order happily and promises he will do his absolute best to rest up. The young man jokes that the Duke never gave him time off and reveals his true life dream is to do nothing, but he has to work for money. The Duke laughs and promises he will win the competition to fulfill his dream, asking the Emperor for a gold mine as a gift. A few seconds later, Talon is already fast asleep and snoring loudly in the middle of the knight's tent. At that moment, a person takes advantage of the guy's professional sleep to discreetly hide a mysterious scroll in his pocket. The harsh words that the seventh prince had said earlier about the Duke's blind loyalty keep echoing in the warrior's mind. Duke Fetus grows tormented, remembering the prince's cruel taunt that his son would grow up to be just another obedient dog. Unable to catch a wink of sleep due to anger, the veteran decides to step out of the tent in the middle of the cold night to clear his head. Before leaving, he looks at the dark corner of the tent and comes face to face with that heavy backpack full of rocks the prince ordered him to carry. The Duke puts the bag on his back and walks out struggling, while the sound of clanking rocks echoes through the quiet forest. He walks toward the temple under the moonlight, remembering a day in the past when he took his son Flynn to see the place. Back then, the father explained to the little boy that a powerful divine savior had descended from the heavens to end the chaos of the ancient world. Little Flynn smiled proudly and shared that he had already read about it in books, knowing the hero was Emperor Sierra the Great. The father used to say that the emperor was the very embodiment of a god on earth, wielding magical powers to subdue all enemies. He explained that the great hero was the one who founded the vast empire and started the royal bloodline their family swore to serve forever. The Duke looked lovingly at the child and said with a chest full of pride that Flynn was his most precious treasure in this world. The father sincerely asked his son to inherit his will and become the golden sword that would honorably protect imperial royalty. Back in the present, the exhausted veteran feels the unbearable weight of the backpack and angrily questions why he is still hauling it. He starts wondering if he does all of that out of pure loyalty or out of foolishness, until the sharp sound of a horn cuts through the night. The Duke hears the emergency signal echoing in the distance across the hills and goes on high alert, fearing something serious happened. The next day, a large crowd gathers in agitation, commenting in shock that the terrible roar of beasts simply didn't stop all night long. The guards gossip, saying the first prince defeated all the creatures single-handedly, which would mean an immediate end to the tournament. An official announcement declares that the 4-day competition ended early due to the overwhelming result Russia achieved in a single night. In front of all gathered soldiers and nobles, first Prince Russia is crowned as the grand absolute winner of the hunt. The emperor congratulates his eldest son on the glorious victory, and the proud young man thanks him with reverence before the throne. The ruler orders Russia to follow kingdom tradition and immediately announce what wish he wants granted by the crown. The Duke and other soldiers whisper anxiously in the crowd, asking each other what kind of grand wish the prince will demand. Russia kneels and says that many wanderers are invading the sacred temple, threatening the safety of the people and the dignity of the site. The prince says that to restore the temple, he needs royal permission, leaving the Duke desperate as he foresees the absolute worst scenario. The prince's wish is to send ruthless soldiers to violently eliminate all the helpless wanderers in that region. As the Duke sweats in panic, Russia humbly begs the emperor for the authority to clear out the entire temple region once and for all. Amid desperation, the veteran hears his son's tragic voice echoing in his mind as he remembers the terrible moment of the boy's passing. The Duke stands completely frozen upon hearing his son's imaginary voice, desperately calling out for him in the middle of that crowd. He tightens his grip on his sword hilt, realizing he can no longer keep acting like a loyal dog to the Empire while his son is in danger. To the shock of everyone present at the tournament, Duke Fetus steps forward and draws his blade with total determination. With a serious and resolute expression, the veteran silently apologizes to his son Flynn for what he is about to do. Meanwhile, in the medical tent, Talon wakes up from his sleep muttering a few broken words while trying to recover from the blow. The assistant slowly opens his eyes and gets startled, seeing an upside-down silhouette staring at him up close. Talon falls out of bed, startled to greet the 7th prince, but the guy warns him to move slowly so he doesn't get dizzy. Lan Avaran recommends he ask the doctor for medicine later, and the assistant thanks him, feeling very confused by his presence there. The prince ignores the question and asks if he doesn't know about the Duke's situation, warning that the closing ceremony is about to start. The assistant widens his eyes in total fear upon hearing about the start of the important closing ceremony. Lan Avaran tells him to run over there immediately, and Talon sprints out of the tent toward the location where everyone is gathered. The guy runs desperately through the crowd, asking for excuse and begging people to let him pass for just a second. He keeps pushing past guards and nobles, feeling a terrible tightness in his chest as he senses something very grave is going down. Talon screams desperately for his master upon spotting an intense magical light glowing in the center of the main camp square. In the center of the arena, first Prince Rasha focuses his powerful water magic directly against the Duke, who remains kneeling on the ground. The prince gets extremely irritated and asks the Duke what on earth he thinks he's doing by interrupting the imperial ceremony. The Duke explains that his family served the empire faithfully for over 1,000 years, always protecting royalty from the closest position. He states that taking care of mere wanderers at the temple is a very simple task, and therefore demands that his family handle that job. The veteran looks firmly at the emperor and says that before his majesty, he makes this humble request in the name of his entire bloodline. Rasha grows furious and says that out of respect for all the loyalty the Duke gave the kingdom, he would agree to grant that unusual request. However, the emperor finds amusement in the whole situation and comments that it is ridiculous to use that loyalty to try to mess with the royal family's will. The first prince prepares to attack the Duke with his magic, and mockingly asks if he really thought he would receive any mercy. Rasha laughs cruelly and warns that the Duke lost his mind, reminding him that interrupting a sacred ceremony results in immediate execution. The Duke accepts his terrible fate and firmly states he will pay with his own life for the sin of interrupting the royal ceremony. From afar, in the middle of that massive crowd of soldiers and nobles, Talon lets out a desperate scream calling for his master. Lan Avaran watches the entire scene from a prime spot with a smile on his face, hoping the real MC is watching everything. In a very distant part of the forest, a mysterious young man wearing a brown hood is crouching at the riverbank scooping up some water. The guy gets intrigued upon realizing the river water begins moving and glowing in a very strange way right before his eyes. He steps back startled by that sudden magical surge in the water, not understanding what exactly is triggering that unusual reaction. The truth is that execution will serve to show the world the true cruel nature of the imperial family ruling the kingdom. That mysterious hooded young man at the riverbank is Littell, the true and legendary MC of the book Dark Heather. He is the hero who will rise in the future against the Empire, but right now, the focus is on the punishment of that brave warrior who served the kingdom for years. The Duke is surrounded by a high-pressure magic water barrier, being condemned as the sinner who dared insult the imperial family. Rasha raises his energized hand and coldly decrees that in the name of the first prince, he will carry out the Duke's death sentence right there. A massive column of water completely engulfs the veteran's body under the shocked and terrified stares of everyone in the arena. The audience recoils in horror, witnessing the prince's lack of mercy and the terrible violence of that summary execution mid-ceremony. Trapped inside that dense, high-pressure water sphere, the Duke begins suffocating desperately as he realizes he can't breathe. He opens his eyes with great difficulty underwater and spots a figure sprinting toward him from outside the barrier. The veteran recognizes Talon desperately trying to save him and wonders in disbelief why the young assistant decided to risk himself there. The Duke realizes the assistant was just faking the dizziness to calm him down, feeling relieved to see the guy is healthy. He regrets having to say goodbye in such a pathetic way and mentally begs Talon to take care of his beloved son Flynn after his passing. Suddenly, the Duke focuses his gaze on the crowd and spots 7th Prince Lan Avaran watching everything with extreme coldness and composure. The veteran tries to read the prince's lip movements through the water barrier, intrigued by what he seems to be saying. The MC seems to be saying very firmly that he must not give in to death so easily like that. Feeling a sudden surge of determination, the Duke opens his eyes with fury and decides it is not time to pass away in that place just yet. Rasha makes another quick motion with his raised arm to release all the destructive energy built up in his powerful water magic. A massive beam of bluish light explodes violently toward the skies, illuminating that entire area with insane intensity. The gigantic magic energy shockwave spreads furiously throughout the entire camp, marking the ruthless end of that terrible punishment. The Duke grits his teeth with immense force as he takes the full devastating impact of the magic attack unleashed by the prince. Rasha focuses his energy and shuts down the magic flow with total coldness, observing the destruction caused in front of the entire crowd. Seeing the terrible fate of his master, Talon falls into despair and screams while being held back by force by the royal guards. Hidden in the middle of that chaos, Lan Avaran merely observes the tragic end of the veteran with a cold, indifferent expression. Far away from there, little Flynn stays focused writing in his notebook without the slightest clue of the tragedy that just happened to his father. The boy stops writing and looks out the window, admiring a glowing trail of magic energy crossing the blue sky that afternoon. In the distant forest, Littell spots the huge light column clearing in the sky and realizes something very strange is going down. Without hesitating for a single second, the hooded young man dashes off toward the spot where the magic light emerged. Ladle lands abruptly in the middle of the woods, snapping branches and leaves with the impact of his rushed jump. He raises his head with his striking yellow eyes glowing intensely, focused on finding the source of that explosion. The guy charges quickly through the bushes, following the small trails of magic water that are still falling all over that area. He complains inwardly that the energy fog is way too dense, making it hard to see who exactly is inside. Latel clenches his fist upon noticing a human silhouette trapped inside that massive, chaotic floating water sphere. With an impressive jump, the hero launches himself into the air straight toward the top of that terrifying magic barrier. The young man dives fearlessly into the middle of the dense water current to rescue the person who was about to drown inside. Latel reaches out his arm with determination underwater, trying to grab the veteran's hand before it was too late. He manages to snatch the victim and pulls him out of the water barrier with all his strength, saving him from terrible suffocation. The guy lands safely on the damp grass of the clearing, out of breath from the extreme effort of pulling off that dangerous rescue. Ladle stays alert at the edge of a cliff, holding the rescued man firmly while trying to catch his breath. He looks down very tense, wondering if he ended up missing something or if the enemy managed to escape from that spot. The hooded young man stares at the horizon thoughtfully, watching the last spark of that colossal magic explosion disappear into the sky. Littell turns his back on the view and prepares to leave quickly, carrying the person he just saved with him. At the camp, Talon watches it all in shock while the crowd murmurs in disbelief over the tragic and merciless end of the war hero. People whisper about what will happen to his family, while noticing that the young man with glasses frozen right there was the Duke's assistant. The Emperor coldly decrees the end of the matter, and the nobles begin organizing the tournament's closing ceremony for noon. The official announcement warns all participants to prepare for the wrap-up of activities shortly. Rasha cleans his gloves with extreme arrogance, mocking that he just crushed a tiny, insignificant insect. The prince walks victoriously and says that whenever royalty shows mercy, insolent people who don't know their place always pop up. The nobility whispers that the fetus family is completely ruined and mocks the foolishness of the late leader, leaving Talon hanging his head. Gradually, people start leaving the central square, leaving behind only the tracks of their steps on the packed dirt floor. The massive crowd disperses completely, leaving the young assistant standing in the middle of the arena, totally abandoned and desolate. One of the nobles passing by the guy even spits on the ground with disgust, rudely cursing him as a traitor to the country. Lan Avaren watches the young man's humiliation from afar and thinks with regret that Talon's heart must be completely shattered right now. He knows about the friendship they had, but trusts that the assistant's determination won't be broken so easily by that loss. Talon returns to his completely wrecked tent and starts picking up things from the floor in deep sadness. Amid the mess of broken beds, he comes across a small, rolled-up scroll and wonders what that letter could be. Picking up the object and inspecting the wax seal, Talon realizes in shock that it is the official crest of the fetus family. The Duke had written in the letter that if Talon was reading it, he was likely already gone, asking for prayers for his soul. The master earnestly asked the assistant to protect his beloved son Flynn, begging him to accept his final wish in life. The veteran confessed feeling he would make a big mistake soon, but wanted the guy to know a very important truth. He fondly assured that absolutely nothing that happened from then on would be the assistant's fault. The Duke signed, declaring with full authority that as head of the family, he had one last decision to make. The paper slips from the guy's trembling hands and lands softly on the tent floor while he cries uncontrollably. The letter revealed that in the event of the leader's passing, Talon Krissa would be officially named the new acting head of the entire fetus family. Sometime later, inside a luxurious tower, Lan Avaren confronts Rasha, saying he overused his magical energy during the tournament. Rasha spits blood while the MC warns that his health has taken a severe downturn since the hunt, but the prince tells him to shut his mouth. Furious, Rasha holds the blue absorption stone and yells that the treatment method is wrong, demanding an answer under threat of death. The MC calmly advises him to release his magic slowly, as rushing it will only worsen his entire condition. Lan Avaren guesses Rasha's vengeful thoughts, knowing he is swearing revenge and promising to eliminate him as soon as he recovers. With a light smile, the guy warns that this illness has no immediate cure, reminding him that he only remains breathing thanks to the power of that stone. The MC hears a rumor that Talon is still in a coma, which makes him feel a slight and unexplainable hint of guilt. Lan Avaren mentally hopes the young man doesn't end up passing away from that rock blow. While the assistant finally opens his eyes in bed, Talon looks confused at the room ceiling and wonders where exactly he is after spending so much time unconscious. A servant tries to help him sit up due to weakness, but the guy says he is fine and politely asks the employee to step back. The employee insists, saying he spent 2 weeks passed out and warns he might end up collapsing onto the floor at any second. Talon says he needs to see young heir Flynn immediately and asks what the current situation of the late Duke's family is. The servant reveals disheartened that all business partners abandoned them and that almost all mansion employees left as well. He laments that their financial state is terrible and says they can't ask royalty for help due to the rebellion committed by the Duke. Just as the servant was about to speak of the heir, little Flynn walks quietly into the room and calls out to the assistant in surprise. Talon feels immensely relieved and yells young heir's name upon seeing him safe and sound right before his eyes. Flynn asks if he is feeling okay, and Talon bows, offering sincere apologies for causing the boy so much worry. The boy shares that many problems came up, and that they couldn't even organize a funeral for his father, but Talon says he has a plan for that. Suddenly, the assistant hears some nasty whispers from employees outside the window, commenting on the late Duke. The servants gossip that the Duke lost his mind because Flynn was supposedly a wanderer, suggesting everyone run off so they aren't labeled traitors. Talon looks out the window with hatred, aware that the stain of Empire traitors would be an impossible smudge to clean from the fetus family honor. With an extremely cold gaze, the guy calls over one of the remaining servants, who answers the call shaking in fear of his new leader. Talon coldly orders them to cut out the tongues of the gossiping employees as punishment for spreading false rumors about Air Flynn. The servant stands horrified by the brutality of the order, but Talon firmly asks if he really needs to repeat the command. Lacking any nerve to cross the new master, the servant makes a deep bow and promises to carry out the terrible order right away. Talon adds that they won't hold any funeral for the Duke either, leaving little Flynn quite terrified by that decision. The guy explains that the deceased can no longer be considered a family member and asks the little boy to try to understand his reasons. Flynn cries, not understanding why he would do something so cruel, but Talon reminds the boy that he is now the acting head of the fetus family. The assistant states he has a sacred duty to protect the clan until the boy grows up, ensuring everyone's honor and survival from now on. Talon slowly removes his glasses with a dark expression, showing that his gentle look has completely vanished from that face. He states with total conviction that to save the fetus family, he will use absolutely whatever means necessary. Meanwhile, at First Prince Rasha's mansion, the lit fireplace contrasts with the tense silence dominating that entire luxurious room. Suddenly, Rasha explodes in pure rage and starts smashing and throwing all the room furniture onto the floor while screaming in hatred. The prince rants furiously, smashing plates and vases against the walls while cursing his own fate for that humiliating situation. Out of breath amid all that destruction, Rasia leans on the window trying to catch his breath after his violent fit of rage. He screams, asking why on earth he had to be stuck inside there, scaring one of the maids who was trying to peek through the door. Rasia swears he will tear the MC apart personally, but Lan Avaran walks into the room totally calm and mentions he needs a favor from him tomorrow. The MC tells his brother to spread the rumor that he is going to enter the Imperial Forest, but without actually setting foot inside. The prince yells in outrage, asking why he would do something so ridiculous, and the guy explains he has some important business to handle there. Rasha tells him to go alone, but Lan explains he doesn't want anyone knowing his location, and if Rasha goes, no one else can enter the woods. Suspicious, the older brother asks what exactly the guy is up to, and what he plans to do all by himself inside there. Lan Avaran gives a mysterious smile, saying only that it's part of the medical treatment, and tells his brother to wait patiently locked in the room. Losing control of himself, Rasha resorts to violence and pins the MC against the wall with all his strength, calling him a bastard. The prince squeezes his neck with his glowing magic and warns him he's getting way too arrogant, saying the Empire's sages could fix his illness easily. He rants saying the guy finally ran out his patience and threatens to end his life right then and there. Even while being choked and spitting blood, Lan flashes a mocking smile and makes fun of his brother's idea to ask the kingdom's sages for help. The MC warns that since his brother just abused his magical power, his remaining lifespan just shrank significantly. Right on the spot, the prince lets go of the guy and drops to the floor groaning in extreme pain while spitting up a lot of blood from excessive magic strain. Lan gets up smoothly and warns that if treatment stops now, Rasha won't even be able to move in less than a week. He smiles and asks if his brother isn't curious to know how the royal family would react upon learning the first prince collapsed. The MC questions whether they would actually try to save him or simply pick a new heir to take the throne in, so his place. Lan walks to the door and taunts that if Rasya passes away, another will take the throne, leaving his brother enraged, calling him a wretched worm. With a terrifyingly dark look and eyes glowing red, Lan orders him to start using his brain if he really doesn't want to die. Wiping blood from his mouth, Rasha stares at his brother with pure hatred, warning that since they share the same blood, his patience is also very short. Lan Avaran leaves and tells his brother to stop sending spies after him, reminding him that vanishing without a trace is his top specialty. He closes the door, warning that all spies failed so far, and says his brother is only delaying his own treatment and wearing them both out. Rasha gets furious and demands to know what his brother's true goal is, claiming there must be a very strong reason for him to do all this. Lan Avaran merely looks back with a calm expression and replies mysteriously that nobody knows what his goal is. He turns into a crow and flies freely over the forest, reflecting that his one true goal in life is simply survival. The crow flaps its wings hard, crossing the sunny sky while carrying a small pouch clutched in its talons during flight. It lands back on the ground in the middle of the dense woods, instantly shifting shape, while a few black feathers drop around him. The guy walks through the damp bushes and celebrates making 3 full loops around the forest without encountering a single living soul. Lan explains he isolated that area on purpose so he could test his mysterious transformation ability with total safety and 0 interruptions. He remembers the horse and figures he can turn into other animals, concluding the power will be very handy if there's a wide variety of forms. But to be absolutely sure of its potential, the guy knows he needs to understand the exact rules of how this ability operates. Opening his pouch, he decides the first key step is finding out the exact conditions to turn into a specific animal. He recalls having direct physical contact with the crow and the horse before the shifts, suspecting touch is the main trigger. To put this theory to a practical test, the MC prepares necessary materials to build a simple trap in the forest. He sets up a small wooden box and decides the best path to start the experiment is trying to catch some small animal. The guy uses fresh fruit brought from the imperial kitchen as bait and suddenly hears the rustle of leaves on a nearby branch. Lanaviran focuses his attention toward the leaf sound, curious to see what creature was just drawn in by the smell of food. He looks up and spots a tiny squirrel jumping branch to branch in the large tree right above where he stands. The MC realizes the trap wasn't even ready, but starts wondering if it would be possible to catch the squirrel that way. The little creature climbs down the tree trunk quickly with nimble steps, staring at the guy with plenty of curiosity. To his surprise, the squirrel approaches without fear and climbs straight onto his palm, happily grabbing nuts the guy was holding. Lan pets the small rodent while it eats the seeds, playfully asking what it would do if a bad person tried to catch it. Happy to have achieved physical contact much sooner than expected, the MC decides it's the perfect time to attempt a transformation. The guy closes his eyes with deep focus and decides to launch the activation process of his transmutation magic power. A bright, golden energy glows around his body as he commands the transformation, scaring the squirrel, which bolts away right then. But after the glow fades, he realizes annoyed that he remains exactly the same and that absolutely nothing changed in his human body. The guy speculates if the transformation only happens in moments of extreme need, like a desperate urge to fly high or run super fast. He wonders what a squirrel would actually want to do, but questions if the power only works if he has a genuine, serious desire. Suddenly, the squirrel bites the strap of his bait pouch and runs off at high speed with all the stolen nuts. Lanaviran yells in outrage, asking where that bold rodent thinks it's going carrying his entire pouch on its back. The guy starts chasing the squirrel through the forest, shouting for the animal to return the bag and mentioning he'd give the nuts if it just asked. The MC dives onto the ground in desperation and manages to grab the edge of the cloth pouch just in time, cheering the catch. The squirrel keeps biting and pulling the fabric with strength, and the guy complains, amazed to see the creature refuses to let go of the bag. Lan decides to get into a tug-of-war with the little creature and angrily warns he'll see who comes out winner of that ridiculous battle. Suddenly, the stitching on the pouch strap can't handle the heavy tension and tears completely with a snapping sound. The MC widens his eyes in shock upon realizing he lost his balance after the pouch strap snapped unexpectedly. He takes a nasty tumble on the grass and goes rolling across the forest floor amid a massive, noisy mess. Night finally falls on the kingdom, and the full moon shines in the starry sky above the imposing castle of the imperial dynasty. A young maid knocks on Lan's room door, mentioning she brought dinner, and the guy answers from inside telling the girl to come in. The maid opens the door hoping everything is normal this time in the residence of the kingdom's problematic 7th prince. She gets startled seeing Lan all covered in dirt, and the prince calmly explains his clothes got dirty while walking near the palace. The maid accepts the explanation, and the guy breathes a sigh of relief for not getting caught during his return from the forest as a crow. The MC laments that he didn't uncover the secret to the new transformation and spent the whole day getting made a fool of by a squirrel. The young maid glances at him sideways, seemingly finding that whole walking story quite suspicious and weird. Lan asks her to bring clean clothes and notes he's going to take a bath, but the girl stutters and tries to point out a bizarre detail. The guy gets intrigued and impatiently asks what the servant means by stalling in the middle of the room. The maid points tremblingly at his backpack and asks curiously, what exactly is moving inside there? Lanaviran looks back startled and comes face to face with the bold squirrel, peeking its head out of the tear in the cloth pouch. The MC loses his temper and tries to snatch the mischievous rodent right away, calling the little creature a crazy squirrel. The animal hops onto Lan's head, and the maid screams desperately, begging the prince not to hurt the animal and promising to throw it out. With the squirrel on his head, the guy ignores the servant's panic and tells her to focus on her job and bring his set of clothes already. Lanaviran yells annoyed, saying he already gave that order, and tells her to run and fetch clean garments right now. The young maid runs as fast as she can down the long hallway, desperately thinking she needs to get back quickly. She gets super worried about what might happen to the small squirrel if she takes too long to return. The girl mentally asks the little animal to hang on just a bit more, but suddenly spots someone along the way. The maid freezes in panic upon coming face to face with the first princess of the empire right there in front of her. Mental recognizes the girl as one of Lan's servants and asks why she is running in such a rush like that. The maid begs for her life on her knees, while the princess gets suspicious of the clothing bundle and asks if she is stealing from the palace. Desperate, the servant swears on the empire's deity that she would never do such a thing and denies the theft accusation. The maid explains that Lan's clothes got dirty in the garden, while the princess reaches out her hand toward her head. Mental says it doesn't matter if the servant is lying or not, because it is simply impossible to fool her. The princess uses her magic on the girl's head to find out if that garden story was true or just an excuse. Mental suddenly gets very intrigued and surprised upon seeing a specific image pop up in the maid's mind. She sees an image of Lan with several leaves scattered across his clothes, indicating where he actually was. The princess realizes her brother wasn't in the garden and concludes with certainty that he was up to something in the imperial forest. In the room, Lan asks the squirrel what it plans to do from here on out and if it's going to keep running away the whole time. He notes he has no clue how the creature got to the castle, but makes it clear that's no place for an animal to live. The prince offers help to take the squirrel back to the forest and asks it to surrender peacefully once and for all. Lan warns things will get messy if it refuses, but the rodent answers with defiant squeaks. The MC knows it makes no sense to have a rodent loose in the palace, even if it's just a small squirrel. On top of that, the situation reminds the guy of his past life on Earth, when he couldn't sleep due to rats in the walls. Annoyed by the deviations from the original story, he tries to grab the creature and asks what kind of trouble it wants to cause there. Lan cheers upon finally capturing the animal and tells the squirrel to behave and get inside the bag right now. Suddenly, the squirrel bites the prince's hand hard, letting out an extremely loud squeak of fury. Lan complains in sharp pain and yells, asking how such a tiny creature has the nerve to bite a member of royalty. The rodent jumps with impressive agility and starts scaling the room wall without the slightest struggle. Lan watches the squirrel up high, near the room ceiling, surprised at the height the clever creature managed to reach. He realizes that if he tries to climb up to reach it, the smart little animal will simply run off to another unreachable corner. The guy thinks that in a scenario like this, everything would be way easier if he could transform into a squirrel too. Lan sighs, noting that just wishing for the transformation fixes nothing, but suddenly feels something very strange happen. The guy gets amazed as a golden glow begins wrapping around his body and realizes his power is finally reacting. Lan realizes in wonder that transmutation magic is actually working for real this time. The MC finally grasps the secret and exact condition to transform into any animal. Completing the transformation, the now newly made squirrel lets out a confident little smile for cracking the mystery. But the guy panics right after, upon realizing he is plunging from high up on the wall straight toward the floor. He worries about the impact of falling from that height, but someone opens the room door and cuts the moment short. Mentil opens the door abruptly and counters her servant, saying she doesn't need to take any special care entering her brother's room. The princess complains about the place's maids and expresses deep dislike for the servants working in that wing of the palace. She stops talking suddenly upon looking at the floor and spotting something quite unusual right in front of her. Mental comes across two small squirrels tangled together on the floor and stands quite confused by that weird scene. She finds it absurd that wild animals are loose in the residence of a royal family member, even if he is mistreated. Meanwhile, the princess's attendant can't resist the cuteness of the two rodents together and nearly melts over the adorable scene. Lan, in his squirrel form, feels extremely uncomfortable with the embarrassing situation and regrets how things turned out. Time passes, and the next morning finally arrives at the grand palace of the imperial family. Back in his human form, the prince pets the squirrel affectionately while it rests peacefully on the table. The guy realizes the little creature hasn't left his side since the previous night and wonders if it's acting this way out of gratitude. Lan warns the squirrel that it would be too much hassle to take it to the forest and tells it to hide well so nobody sees it in the room. He celebrates finally cracking the transmutation mystery, finding humor in the silly condition he had to fulfill. The guy begins analyzing his past experiences and recalls when he transformed into a crow for the first time. He notes that the crow, the black horse, and the squirrel had the exact same unusual trait before he changed forms. The MC concludes he needed to touch the nape of each animal's neck with precision, finding that activation rule super specific and useless. With the mystery solved, he focuses on the biggest current danger, which is dealing with the suspicions of his dangerous sister, mental aberran. Lan remembers how the princess was described in the novel, but never imagined she could have such a terrifying expression in person. Luckily, the maid Anna helped him by saying the squirrel was a pet, giving him the perfect chance to escape through the window. After reverting to human form and returning to the room, the prince thought all that chaos had finally ended well. Mental commented on his weird taste in animals and noted she was leaving since it was late, leaving the guy relieved. But the princess caught him off guard by ordering him to meet her in her quarters the next day without fail. With a cold smile on her face, she firmly warned that the two had very important matters to discuss. Back to the present, Lan grows thoughtful and wonders if his sister found out something and what exactly she wants to talk about. He starts worrying about the possibility that she uncovered his true identity, but tries to convince himself it's impossible. With no option to turn down the invite, he stretches and tells the little squirrel he simply has no choice but to go there. Upon reaching the meeting location, the seventh prince is formally greeted by one of the guards protecting the entrance. The guard mentions that the first princess is waiting for him inside, while Lan admires the absurdly colossal size of those doors. Mental receives him elegantly and comments that he must have taken a long walk to get to her quarters. She offers him a seat, but Lan declines, saying he's fine, and asking right away why he was called there. With an icy look, the princess interrupts him and firmly asks if he didn't hear her tell him to sit down at once. Sensing the tense vibe, the guy swallows hard, apologizes for his rudeness, and decides to obey his sister's command. Mental laughs softly and says it's fine, commenting that curiosity got the better of him, and that he was always someone very impatient. In her thoughts, she finds it strange that her brother changed so much and went alone to a dangerous place he had never visited before. Lan stays tense in his seat, reminding himself that it was precisely because of this kind of pressure that he wanted to avoid the princess. The MC reflects that Manus magic always manifests with elements of nature, like the Emperor's fire or Rasha's water. However, Mental's power is completely out of the ordinary and, in a way, stands way above all other known magics. Her magic is centered on humans, giving her the terrifying ability to read and even manipulate anyone's mind. She asks him to answer with total honesty, warning that she gets very sad when someone from her beloved family tries to fool her. Lan tries to stay completely calm, knowing a crucial detail that Mental's mind-reading ability simply doesn't work on him. He knows she would have already controlled his mind if she could, and figures she must have realized recently that her power failed on him. With knowledge links from the original book, he recalls 2 rules for her power to fail, starting with the need to be a blood relative. The second failure condition requires the target to feel true familial love for Mental, which becomes a huge problem for him. It's obvious the guy would never feel love for a woman like that, while she loses her patience and demands that he answer quickly. But if he doesn't love her as family, the MC stays puzzled, not understanding why Mental's magic isn't working on him. Far away, the scene shifts to the inside of a dark, damp cave, where the noise of a waterfall echoes loudly off the rocks. Drops of crystal-clear water slowly drip from the tips of stalactites on the ceiling, making a rhythmic sound in the room's silence. A single drop breaks free from the dark rock and glows faintly in the dark as it plummets toward the cave floor. The water drop hits right on Duke Fetus's eye, who is sprawled out lying on the stone floor completely unconscious. The old former commander opens his eyes, startled by the impact of the cold water, and begins regaining consciousness very slowly. The elderly man lets out low groans of pain while straining his vision to figure out where he is in the middle of that deep darkness. Holding his sore head, he gets up with difficulty and asks himself confused if that mysterious place might be Terirum or Hodi. Suddenly, a mysterious hooded figure emerges from the cave shadows and calmly comments that the man managed to survive. The Duke asks startled who he is and if he is really alive, and the hooded figure replies he thought he had passed away given the long delay. Without wasting time beating around the bush, the mysterious person starts drawing his sheathed sword and warns he will begin questioning now. The warrior points the glowing blade straight at the elderly man and firmly asks if he is someone loyal to the Empire of Aberran. With his yellow eyes glowing beneath the hood, Littell demands a simple answer and warns that the Duke's fate hinges on it. Back at the Imperial Palace, Mentil's mind remains intrigued, trying to decode why her mind reading isn't working on Lan. With eyes glowing blue, the princess asks once more why he suddenly changed so much and transformed into another person. Lan figures there must be a clear reason for her power's failure, questioning if it has to do with the fact that he reincarnated there. The guy recalls that the original 7th Prince was such an insignificant character that there was barely any info about him in the book. Mental mockingly comments that she can almost hear his thoughts frying and asks if the answer is really that hard. The guy finds himself in a major dilemma, not knowing if he should play dumb, but doubts heavily that his sister will just let him walk away. Lan decides the best strategy right now is to mimic the weak and cowardly personality the original seventh prince used to have. Noticing his silence, the princess gives up waiting, steps back, and warns in a threatening tone that she'll have to use another method to talk. Mental claps her hands decisively and loudly orders the Imperial Knights guarding the door to enter the room right now. The guards stand at the ready as they enter, and she comments that it's very frustrating that her own dear little brother flat out refuses to speak. To force him to talk, Mental coldly orders the guards to use their swords to slice open the seventh prince's mouth. The guards get extremely scared and desperately say that humble servants like them could never commit such a cruelty. They kneel, begging her to reconsider the order, but Mentil just coldly complains that the two are making way too much noise. With an extremely threatening look, the princess states seriously that she despises annoying noises more than anything. Right then, the knight's eyes glow blue, and they become completely controlled by Mentil's mind magic. Without control over their own actions, one of the guards draws his sharp sword to execute the princess's terrible order. Faking cowardice, Lan backs away terrified and shakily asks his sister what the true meaning of all that violence is. Mental says with disdain that there's no other choice since her brother refuses to answer, leaving the guy in a tense spot. She warns him to pick his next words very carefully, as that is the only way he will manage to walk out of there in one piece. Cornered, the guy lets out a desperate scream and suddenly reveals that his own biological mother has passed away. The young man lowers his head with a deeply sad expression, keeping up his disguise of fragility in front of his sister. Mental stands totally in shock over the unexpected revelation and asks confusedly what exactly he is talking about. The princess questions what makes him think that and asks suspiciously if he's been in touch with their mother this whole time. He shakes his head and begins explaining that things aren't quite like that, trying to give a very convincing excuse. The prince shares that before leaving, his mother left him a beautiful necklace as a gift with a glowing blue stone in the center. She had said that as long as the blue glow remained, they would meet again, but recently that light started fading away. Right after, without any prior warning, the necklace's beautiful gem turned completely dark and ended up shattering to pieces. Lan shares that after going through a moment of pure panic over what happened, a very sad thought crossed his mind. He figured his mother, who suffered so much, had finally passed away and found eternal peace in her homeland in the east. Despite the guy's extremely sad and convincing tone of voice, that whole emotional story is a complete lie. In the original novel, among all the emperor's mistresses, the seventh prince's mother was the only one who managed to escape the imperial palace. The real reason for her escape was never revealed in the story, leaving it only to assume that she had indeed returned to the east. Some kingdom gossips believed she fled simply because she gave birth to an heir with unusual black hair. But either way, this mysterious woman never showed up again in the original work until the end of the book. Mental comments she thought he held a grudge against their mother, and Lan pretends he only felt resentment for being abandoned in childhood. He continues his dramatic act, saying maybe he would look up at the eastern sky holding the necklace every night out of longing. The guy laments holding the cheap necklace in hand, saying deceitfully that deep down he missed his biological mother dearly. She asks if that made him change his mind about his living relatives, and Lan philosophizes, saying it's amazing how resentment turned into longing. The MC wraps up his speech saying that maybe that's the true meaning of family, or at least that's what he believes. Mental stays completely silent listening to the story, appearing deeply moved and convinced by her brother's touching tale. Convinced, she tells the guards to sheath their swords and wait outside, and the men obey her command immediately. The princess uses her magic once more to completely wipe the guards' memories of everything that took place inside that room. The imposing golden doors close smoothly, while the Imperial Knights step out in perfect silence from the room. Tense on the inside, Lan wonders if the lie worked, while Mental laments the suffering her young brother had to endure. She approaches affectionately, holds her brother's hands, and says he must have suffered a lot, making the guy celebrate the plan's success. She states he is still her little brother even if he's a black-haired failure, and Lan wonders if she's making fun of him. He knows her power always fails when familial love is present, and that she suspected him because the seventh prince was never on her side. Relieved to have survived thanks to the cheap necklace he found lying around, he celebrates the fact that his improvised lie worked. Suddenly, he remembers Duke Fetus and wonders what happened to the man after the fall into the valley described in the original novel. The prince mentally visualizes the dangerous gorge with the grand waterfall and sincerely hopes the elderly man hasn't passed away. Back in the dark cave, Duke Fetus lets out a groan of pain while the mysterious hooded figure advises him not to move. Leitel points the cold blade toward the injured man and briefly and directly warns that the old noble's right leg is broken. Unarmed and with a broken leg, the former commander realizes he doesn't stand the slightest chance of escaping or fighting in his awful state. Even in the dark, the elderly man notices that the warrior maintains a flawless combat stance and is terrifyingly strong. He stammers terrified, begs the swordsman to lower his weapon, and anxiously asks what is actually going on in that place. Leitel just stares at him coldly under his brown hood and calmly comments that apparently the old man hasn't been awake for long. The guy reveals he saw a water sphere crossing the sky a few days ago and tried to follow it, but lost sight of it due to its high speed. Leitel adds that there seemed to be someone inside the sphere, but concludes the person must have shattered upon the violent impact with the ground. The Duke realizes in shock that the young man is talking about him and Rassia's water sphere, but wonders confusedly how he managed to survive the impact. Looking to the side, a surprising revelation crosses the old man's mind as he considers that the heavy rock backpack saved his life. The Duke feels around his clothes and realizes annoyed that he doesn't have the object, thinking it must have fallen during the execution. Leitel shares that he accidentally found an unconscious old man covered in blood inside a cave right nearby. Without any warning, the young warrior drives his sword into the stone wall, brushing right past the elderly man's face. Leitel steps forward quickly and grabs the old noble by the collar of his clothes, cornering him against the dark cave wall. He demands to know in the name of the god Amika if the man is loyal to the empire of Abaran, leaving the Duke shocked to hear the deity's name. The former commander stammers in terror upon realizing he ran straight into a feared heretical follower of Amika. The Duke remembers seeing bodies of beggars tossed on the streets, something very common to see in that region of the empire. He also recalls the image of his little son Flynn crying, his face all dirty and bruised. The elderly man remembers being called a heartless imperial dog and mocked with claims that his son would grow up to be just like him. Overcome by these painful and bitter memories of his past, the Duke begins speaking with great difficulty. He fondly remembers his dear and beloved son Flynn, the single most important person in his entire life. The little boy was the old warrior's greatest treasure and pride, whom he always tried to protect with all his strength. The Duke remembers teaching his son to follow in his footsteps, be the imperial family's sword, and eliminate the kingdom's heretics. He lets out a long, tired sigh, finally deciding what answer to give the dangerous warrior standing before him. He states he knows nothing about loyalty to the empire and says he is just a senile old man who tripped and fell while walking distracted. The Duke expresses thanks for the treatment on his broken leg and mentions he won't even bother asking where he's being taken. He asks the guy to at least untie the rope bound to his left ankle to make walking easier, but Leitel coldly refuses. The elderly man argues that another fall would be a disaster at his age, and that it would be way more work having to drag him if he fell again. Leitel stops walking for a brief second and looks back seriously, staring at the old man without saying a single word. Completely ignoring the injured noble's complaints, the warrior simply pulls the rope harder to keep moving along the path. The Duke lets out a groan of pain upon being yanked abruptly and complains that the guy is completely brushing off all his words. The Duke stays intrigued that a cave like that exists near the forest and remembers hearing the young man clearly mention the name Amika. He ponders if Amika's heretics, who were supposedly wiped out over 50 years ago, had been hiding there the entire time. He tries to recall his fall trajectory and estimates he was thrown in the southwest direction relative to the forest's central tower. The Duke decides he needs to focus on mapping out the inside of the place so he can return later with a strong group of reinforcements. The experienced warrior keeps walking slowly while carefully analyzing every small detail of the terrain. He chuckles to himself, noting that despite being a condemned traitor, he still keeps thinking like an imperial commander. Suddenly, the hooded warrior's boots stop moving on the stone floor, catching them both off guard as he pauses the walk. Leitel slowly turns around in his direction and asks what his name is, leaving the old former commander a bit surprised by the question. The elderly man decides to reveal his true identity and says in a serious tone that his name is Duke Agony Fetus. Leitel rests his hand on the rock and comments he was surprised to find him, as that cave is protected by a powerful divine blessing. He explains that no one can enter there on their own will, much less someone belonging to the hated empire of Abiran. With a quick and forceful movement, the guy drives his sword deep into the cracked cave ground. At that exact moment, a massive golden glow with several ancient magical symbols spreads magnificently across the rocky floor. The Duke stands completely shocked and has to cover his eyes due to the intensity of the radiant light taking over the whole environment. As the stones begin floating around the heavy energy, the elderly man asks himself in panic what is about to go down right there. the cave wall simply vanishes, revealing a grand ancient temple on the other side under the light of a very clear, sunny sky. Ladle says there are only two choices. Either the Duke came as a servant of the Empire to eliminate them, or he was called by the god Amika himself. With his eyes glowing golden, the young warrior officially welcomes him to the sacred domain of Amika. Back at the Imperial Castle during the night, the sound of a muffled groan of exhaustion and pain echoes from inside one of the quarters. First, Prince Rasia appears out of breath and sweating cold as he uses his magic to create a sphere of purifying water. Lying comfortably on his couch, Lan thinks that with the timeline speeded up, the Duke and the main character need to act soon. He expects to hear news from the main character shortly and admits to feeling a bit of guilt for making the old Duke suffer so much in the process. Rasha bursts into the room furious, asking why his brother brought so few black stones, demanding way more to heal quickly. Lan looks at him with an extremely cold demeanor and asks in a slow manner if the crown prince just yelled at him. Intimidated, Rasha stammers, saying he's just frustrated, and asks how much longer he'll have to put up with that foolish treatment. Lan calmly explains that rushing will ruin his body and asks for patience, but Rasha insists on knowing if there isn't a faster method. Rasha asks if there isn't something stronger and more dangerous than the hookah, leaving the seventh prince confused about what he means. The heir recalls that on the first day, Lan told him to stop using the hookah if he was truly worried about his own health. Lan smiles awkwardly and says that either way it's bad for his health and it'd be good to stop, leaving Rasha extremely furious at his nerve. Rasha storms out stomping and cursing in rage, while Lan thinks to himself that using the hookah really is destroying his brother's body. The wine he drinks and even the dinner he ate earlier act as a real poison building up in his system. The first prince is doomed to depend on this treatment until he passes away, unless the evil seed in his body is removed. The MC decides it's time to wrap up the treatment session as he can't be late for the night's important ritual. A strong blue magical glow emerges in the temple, lighting up the whole place where members of the imperial family are gathered. Rasia proudly displays his immense water magic power, making energy flow from his hand in front of the other nobles present there. Despite appearing very exhausted from his internal illness, the crown prince tries to maintain his imposing leader stance. Kelos comments impressed that Rasia's magic increased more than usual and praises his brother, calling him fantastic. The white-haired elderly leader announces to the entire assembly that the day's ritual will wrap up unless there are more challengers. With the sacred activities wrapping up, members of the royal family begin walking together toward the exit of the grand hall. Lan decides to wait seated until everyone leaves the temple so he can exit last without drawing his siblings' attention. However, Kelos approaches from behind and grabs Lan's head aggressively, asking what that black bug is doing there. He mocks asking if the youngest is thinking about his runaway mother, while the MC holds back from teaching the arrogant guy a lesson. Mental suddenly appears behind them both and comments with a serious look that the seventh prince seemed very melancholic the whole ritual. Scared, Kelos stammers trying to apologize, while Lan takes the chance to greet the first princess with total respect and manners. Mental asks if her brother is feeling unwell, and he replies calmly that no, he just found the long ritual a bit boring. She feels relieved by the answer, but advises him not to let his boredom show since it's a very important imperial ceremony. The princess says goodbye in a friendly way, saying she'll see them next time, and steps out of the hall, leaving Kelos shocked. Kelos grabs Lan again, demanding to know why the proud first princess cared about his health, leaving the guy worn out. Suddenly, a strong, firm hand grabs Telos's arm by surprise, putting a stop to the unprovoked attack against the MC. Second Prince Daito Aberon asks in a very calm manner if there's any kind of problem there, startling the young aggressor. Selos quickly covers it up with a fake smile, claiming he was just exchanging a few friendly words with the youngest. Dido comments that his brother must be quite busy as well, while Lan seizes the chance to slip away quietly without making noise. Selos decides to leave right after, while the MC flashes a subtle, discreet smirk for escaping the trouble. Dido joins First Prince Rasha and invites him to walk together as they head back through the castle hallways. Lan watches the second prince from afar and recalls that he always stuck close to and fully backed Rasha Aberon's desires. Rasha asks Dido if he knows the acting head of the fetus family who took charge. After the fall of the house's former duke, the heir comments that Talin Krisa seems to be up to something quite suspicious and intriguing behind the scenes of the Aberan kingdom. Dito explains that the supposed conspiracy is taking place in the central lands that were given up in exchange for Duke Fetus's life. Rasha grumbles annoyed, stating with disdain that he has zero interest in worrying about insignificant bugs like them. He adds that the fetus house only has 1 year left to live, and that entire territory will return to his hands anyway. but Dido surprises his brother by stating there's no need to wait a full year, leaving the heir quite confused. With a calm and mysterious look, the second prince mentions he had a great idea and asks if his brother would like to hear it. Suddenly, a violent punch hits the stone wall of a room with heavy force, breaking the silence with a loud crash. Kelos yells infuriated, asking who on earth the guy thinks he is, while Lan simply answers calmly with his own name. He asks why royalty is paying mind to a useless guy like Lan and threatens him with fire magic, promising to burn him alive. Lan counters asking if doing that wouldn't get him into trouble, leaving the attacker temporarily thrown off and speechless. The guy mockingly says that trying to eliminate him with a power that barely lights an oil lamp will take a whole eternity. Lan warns in a mocking tone that it wouldn't be good for the attacker if other people found out about that weakness of his. Celos stands in shock upon realizing the secret of his weakness was uncovered, and hears Lan pitch a deal to keep quiet. The MC points his finger and orders the youngest to start by fixing that ridiculous attitude of speaking disrespectfully to his older brother. In a tense flashback of the past, terrible screams of agony echo from a torture room packed with blood splattered across the floor. A man suffers horribly while his face is held in an extremely painful way by terrible iron tools. The terrible torture carries on ruthlessly and cruelly under the dim light of a large fire lit in the corner of that dungeon. On the wall hangs a fine painted portrait of Duke Fetus in his golden glory days as commander of the Aberan Empire. Suddenly, a violent strike completely destroys the painting, shattering the glass and wooden frame into several pieces. Standing before a pile of debris and plunged swords, a cold voice declares that Duke Agony Fetus from now on never existed. It decrees there will be no funeral, tomb, or monument so that absolutely nothing remains for people to remember him by. The Duke's belongings are burned in a large bonfire, under the warning that anyone breaking the law will face death as punishment. Back to the present, a servant knocks on the office door, informing the acting head that he brought an important report for him. The man who just entered is Commander Jack, the faithful leader of the proud Fetus family's knights. Jack reports that he arrested those responsible for spreading false rumors in the cavalry, cut their wrists, and kicked them out of the order. He yawns out of exhaustion while mentioning the other culprits were also punished, and Talon notes the commander looks totally wiped out. Jack apologizes and explains he's been working all night due to staff shortages, and Talon praises him for the excellent service. The commander hands over an ancient scroll containing the full list of deserters that Talon had requested earlier. Jack regrets that although they are tightening security, nearly half of the Fetus family forces have already deserted the ranks. Talon reflects worriedly that even historical allies cut ties, and if internal discipline collapses, the Fetus family will be ruined. The commander questions if erasing the late Duke's tracks isn't an overreaction, and if that won't enrage the men still loyal to the former leader. Talon stares at him with an extremely harsh look, and coldly asks if he still considers the former Duke as the head of the house. Scared by the reaction, Jack stammers apologies and admits he also had a really hard time accepting the Duke's tragic end. He regrets that such an honorable commander, loyal to the kingdom, met such a tragic and dishonorable final fate in official records. Jack observes the young man in front of him and thinks to himself that he seems to be dealing with a completely different person than before. The commander wonders if Talon changed this much simply from feeling deeply betrayed by the former Duke's final action. Talon places his hand on the desk packed with reports in a resolute way, mentions the time has come, and tells the commander to follow him. The new acting leader steps out of the room walking firmly, followed closely by Jack and the other knights of the order. Pale approaches Talon to inform him that all preparations for the big public speech have been fully finalized. Talon begins slowly climbing the stone steps toward the raised platform, staying fully focused on his important mission. He takes the final step and positions himself firmly before the huge crowd that was anxiously waiting for his appearance in the courtyard. From high up on the castle balcony, the guy observes the massive amount of servants and soldiers gathered in the lower courtyard of the property. The servants gossip terrified among themselves, remembering that yesterday some kitchen helpers had their tongues cut out for talking too much. The soldiers whisper in fear of being labeled accomplices to traitors and suggest running off as fast as possible before the worst happens. Another worries about the risk of getting caught escaping in secret, while Talon lets out a long sigh to kick off his speech. He starts saying that House Fetus has served the imperial founder from the start, protecting the royal family with immense honor for 1,000 years. He seriously ponders that the current situation turned chaotic, and says he's certain everyone there knows very well what the reason for that is. Talon says the former Duke's name out loud, officially labeling Agony Fetus as a mere traitor to the imperial family. Hearing such a harsh and direct statement from the new leader, Jack and Pale stand completely shocked and freeze in surprise. The young man states the betrayal deeply shook the wealth, unity, and grand thousand-year honor that the fetus family built to its core. Little Flynn observes it all from afar, while Talon admits knowing that many present there seriously doubt House Fetus's loyalty. The guy announces firmly that he will give everyone one last chance and declares that those who wish to leave can depart today. He clarifies that even people with years left on their work contracts will be immediately freed from their duties without fines. Talon asks everyone to pay close attention to his next words and keep the warning well in mind for the future. He states with great pride that House Fetus still has heirs ready to fulfill the sacred 1,000-year oath to the end. He swears he will protect Fetus honor until young Lord Flynn takes over as the new Duke, proving his total loyalty to the Empire. The official House Fetus flag flutters hard in the wind as he warns about the fate reserved for anyone who breaks faith. He wraps up his speech declaring in a threatening tone that traitors won't receive any mercy, telling everyone to keep that well in mind. The servants and soldiers in the courtyard stand completely stunned and speechless before the extreme determination of the young new leader. Commander Jack and Pale glance at each other, quite surprised and amazed by the strength and seriousness shown by the guy on the platform. Jack mentally acknowledges that the tone of the speech was a bit intimidating, but admits to himself that Talon is totally right. The fact that the Fetus family still has a legitimate heir means they still hold chances to show their faithfulness to the Emperor. The warrior thinks that the more Talon strengthens his command, the faster the clan will manage to rise again and regain its prestige. Jack smiles internally, remembering that the only thing he'll miss is seeing the young leader embarrassed by the servants' teasing. Back inside the castle, Talon praises the assistant and asks if the Imperial Temple answered the audience request they sent. Pale reports disappointed that temple priests flat out refuse to receive any member coming from House Fetus. Talon adjusts his glasses in a serious manner and calmly confesses he already expected a negative response from the clerics. He hands a new sealed scroll to the assistant and tells him to warn the priests that they won't regret reading it. Watching the sky, Talon reflects that he still doesn't get the former Duke's intentions in starting a revolt, knowing he would pass away for it. The scene shifts to a carriage traveling through fields, while he wonders if saving the temple beggars was worth that much to the Duke. Sitting inside the carriage, Talon laments that he will never know the truth, but states he holds only one single certainty in his thoughts. The young man adjusts his glasses and solemnly swears to himself that he will never allow the Duke's sacrifice and passing to have been in vain. As the carriage wheels turn on the road, he mentally asks the Duke to watch over his lands and observe his progress from above. Talon steps down from the carriage, takes his first step on the stone ground, and wonders thoughtfully if that is indeed the right place. Before him rises the imposing and massive Imperial Temple, a beautiful structure packed with architectural details. The young leader adjusts his glasses and comments impressed that the grand temple's structure is indeed absolutely magnificent. He reflects thoughtfully on the fact that, although he was granted only a one-year period of command by the imperial family, he begins walking alongside his companions toward the temple's outer courtyard, which is already packed full of citizens. Even if he has to sacrifice everything he owns, Talon swears he will never let First Prince's evil plans succeed. Selos observes the massive crowd from afar with disdain and comments that people are curious about the clan's first official statement. With a sadistic smile on his face, the Crown Prince confesses feeling like crushing those folks like mere bugs. Meanwhile, in the forest, Lan walks calmly and tries to confirm if that is already the medium animal hunting zone. He thinks he already managed to catch enough small animals, like foxes and rodents, and decides to focus on much larger targets now. The guy catches the small squirrel following him again and complains, warning that area of the forest is extremely dangerous for it. Despite the little creature's protests and squeaks, the prince puts it inside the bag and asks it to stay super quiet there for its safety. Lan holds up the bag, intrigued, not understanding how the animal got in there, and playfully considers if the rodent also reincarnated in that world. Suddenly, the seventh prince cuts his thoughts short and turns his gaze attentively upon hearing a sound coming from the thicket. Celebrating for finally finding his target after following the tracks for over an hour, the young heir assumes a nimble stance. The fearsome opponent reveals itself as a massive, terrifying wolf, snarling fiercely and showing off sharp, drooling fangs. Lan greets the beast in a very friendly manner, humorously saying he only wishes to quickly touch the nape of its neck before taking off. The prince thinks he'll manage the physical contact easily, like he did with the other animals, but the creature leaps furiously at him. The huge wolf charges violently toward the guy's face, trying to bite him brutally with its massive, lethal open jaws. Lan dodges the deadly strike and inspects his own wrist with concern, lightheartedly asking himself if he'll manage to leave there in one piece. Seeing no safer option at the moment, the seventh prince lets out a comical yell and starts running at top speed through the brush. The beast runs furiously right behind him, making the MC yell desperately that he really is going to pass away if caught by the animal. Lan complains indignantly to the squirrel he carries in hand, while the small creature squeaks back without showing any concern. Lan recalls that the wolf seemed tame and that he only needed to pet the nape of its neck to successfully copy its form. However, the bold squirrel ruined the perfect peaceful moment by biting the wolf's tail hard, sending the beast into total rage. The prince yells furiously, asking why the creature decided to bite the wolf right at that moment, telling it to go pass away alone if it wanted. Desperate upon noticing the fast approach of the beast, he frantically asks himself which of his animal forms he should transmute into to escape. The guy realizes any land animal would be caught by the wolf, and sadly notes there isn't enough time to take off like a crow. Gritting his teeth out of pure tension, the guy desperately wishes to find a way to run and fly at the same time during the escape. The small squirrel observes Lan's desperation up close, letting out a low, curious squeak while being shaken side to side. The giant wolf cuts its brutal run short out of surprise, letting out a growl of pure confusion and raising its head to inspect the blue sky. Up high, a small, nimble creature glows intensely against the strong sunlight while gliding in a magnificent, free way through the air. Now transmuted into a fine flying squirrel, Lan glides majestically and celebrates relieved for managing to escape the terrible danger. Observing the forest from above, the MC begins reflecting on the true and astounding nature of his transmutation power. He discovers amazed that his magic transformation ability is actually fully customizable to create hybrid creatures. In the temple courtyard, people comment that that area will belong to the Fetus clan and that the Duke demanded the lands even if it cost the kingdom his life. Some nobles wonder if the late Duke had lost his mind and mockingly say the current acting leader doesn't seem all there in the head either. Other street residents speculate if there's some ancient, valuable treasure buried in the region and suggest starting to look for it immediately. Saya slyly whispers to the boy Mir that that's their golden chance to pickpocket distracted people in the crowd. Blended in with the crowd in his dark hood, Littell observes attentively and mentally wonders what Talon's true objective with this is. Talon remains standing before the platform under the constant whispers of the large assembly, waiting for him to continue his speech. The young cleric raises his right hand decisively, making a two-finger sign to focus the people's attention, and says 2 months. He decrees loudly that any beggar remaining there past that deadline will be severely punished for violating the sanctity of that temple. The street residents react outraged, asking where they'll go if kicked out and accusing the Fetus clan of ordering them all to die. Desperate, Mir asks what was said in the announcement, and Saya tells him to stop worrying about that and just run while there's still time. The aristocrats find the decision surprising and speculate if Talon is acting so strictly just to try to please the royal family. Suddenly, a citizen in the middle of the crowd raises an arm and yells, asking what exactly the clan plans to build on that large plot of land. Talon turns his face calmly toward the questioner and answers firmly and simply that he intends to build a hospital there. He announces that House Fetus will create the hospital and that they will also teach the noble art of medicine to all citizens who work there. People find the plan absurd and indignantly question if teaching medicine shouldn't be something reserved solely and exclusively for nobles. 2 noblewomen mock, saying only a crazy family would send someone to learn from the Fetus, predicting that will lead them straight to complete ruin. In the middle of the crowd, Milio in disguise thinks that with the Fetus family rejected by everyone, the chance of that plan working is practically zero. He looks at Talon from afar and concludes he overestimated him, deciding he doesn't need to pay any more attention to him from then on. Suddenly, a yell echoes through the place asking who dares laugh at that man, leaving Milio completely in shock. A luxurious carriage arrives, pushing its way through the people, drawing the attention of everyone present who stand unable to understand a thing. The vehicle door opens, and an important figure begins stepping down slowly, sparking the curiosity of the silent crowd. High Priest Vesper presents himself and declares in the name of God that he guarantees full support to Talon Krissa, the acting head of House Fetus. People around begin whispering in disbelief upon realizing that High Priest Vesper himself is right there in front of them. Facing the sacred presence, citizens begin kneeling and praying fervently, while the religious leader walks calmly. Vesper approaches Talon and says in a friendly way that it's great to see him, leaving the young leader surprised as he bows to the authority. The priest then turns to the crowd and proclaims that they are all lost children of Abiran, walking as travelers toward the same destiny. He carries on his sermon explaining that temptations and evil will always pop up along the path, but praises the nobility of whoever chooses to follow the right trail. Melia watches it all annoyed, while Vesper states that the fetus family was stained by a sinner and that mark can never be wiped away. Even with that stain from the past, the priest reaches out his hand to reinforce that there is still someone there trying to walk the path of righteousness. He places his hand on Talon's head and asks that young man's journey of atonement be blessed and carried out successfully. Talon expresses deep thanks, saying he's moved, and Vesper replies he could never sit idly by before such a noble project. The priest invites him to ride together in the carriage to the temple so they can pay proper respects to the great Emperor Sierra. Talon thanks him with a smile, but internally thinks all of that is a joke and that the old man only showed up to put on a political show. He remembers his family will cover all hospital expenses, while the temple's only condition was securing half of the profits generated. Talon looks at the greedy priest and imagines the size of the smile he gave upon receiving the letter accepting those abusive terms. Despite that, he doesn't regret his decision, as he needed the backing of an important religious authority for his plan to work. Passing through the crowd, Talon makes sure to look directly at Milio and mockingly says goodbye in thought to the young master. Milio falls into total panic, breaking into a cold sweat, unable to figure out at what moment Talon realized his disguised presence there. Talon carries on his way calmly, thinking to himself that shifting the world's structures isn't as simple a task as it seems. In another spot, a noble slams the table furiously, enraged by the sudden appearance of that pushy old priest. Another noble comments that the acting leader was very clever, because with the priest's backing, the nobility will have no choice but to follow him. First, Prince Rasha smiles with disdain and guarantees that the next emperor of Abiran doesn't need to worry, as he already has a plan. The other prince leaves, slamming the door, saying he needs to eliminate someone to calm down, while Rasha mocks, saying there are plenty of bugs around. Rasha stays alone in the room, watching the horizon through the window while holding a glass and reflecting on recent events. He asks his assistant if the acting head really is Talon Krysa, and the man confirms he served the late Duke for 13 years. Rasha takes a sip of wine and grumbles that lately everything has been deeply getting on his nerves. In a sudden fit of rage, he makes a sharp move and hurls the glass violently toward his subordinate. The object shatters directly on the assistant's forehead, making blood instantly pour down his face. Rasia stares at him with a dark look and says that just seeing the man standing there is enough to make him even angrier. Even with his face covered in blood, the faithful assistant merely bows his head submissively and apologizes for the nuisance. Rasha steps away, complaining he's no fun for not screaming, but admits it's because of that coldness he keeps him around, hearing another apology. He throws himself onto the couch and orders the subordinate to start being useful, demanding a full audit into Talon's family tax accounts. Rasha orders the count arrested immediately if they find anything wrong, or to forge evidence if they find nothing, also demanding they clean the blood off the floor. Looking at the sunny sky, Rasha grumbles that the beautiful day annoys him, and that the rapid decline in the crown prince's health also bothers him a lot. He stays thoughtful for a few moments in the same spot, appearing bothered by something he still can't resolve. The prince smirks and thinks that seeing the heir suddenly recover is also an extremely annoying thing to witness. Back at the fetus office, knocks on the door interrupt the quiet, and Assistant Pale announces his arrival to talk to the leader. Pale enters and reports that all hospital preparations wrapped up and that the number of nobles wanting to study medicine exceeded expectations. Right after, the assistant alerts that the real issue is the beggars refusing to leave the central district, as the deadline is almost up. He asks if he should order Jack to prep troops to clear them out, but Talon declines and says he already has a different strategy in mind. Pale agrees with the decision and takes the chance to hand over an important letter that just arrived directly from the Krysa house. Talon finds it very strange that his own biological family reached out first and wonders what their new setup will be. Upon reading the letter, Talon learns that Ego Krysa plans to pay an official visit to meet him in person at the fetus residence. The young leader stands completely in shock upon reading the sender and realizing the person coming to visit him is his own blood brother. 2 weeks pass after that day, and one of the maids waits patiently before the large door for the arrival of the important visitor. Outside the room, Pale, Commander Jack, and the maid wait anxiously in a rather tense silence. Meanwhile, on the inside of the room, a steaming cup of tea is served calmly during the private meeting. Talon rubs his forehead, showing plenty of concern, while his older brother takes a sip of the drink in total silence. The visitor, who is the eldest son of the Krysa house, reveals that their father was placed under house arrest the previous night. He explains that the imperial family ran a tax audit and claims to have uncovered severe irregularities that could land their father in prison. Talon asks if his brother really believes their father would do something like that, but the older one replies that the undeniable fact is the family is in crisis. Talon defends their father tooth and nail, stating he was never greedy and always led a very honest, quiet, and diligent life. The older brother stares at him very seriously and asks if Talon is saying all that out of truly having no clue about the situation's gravity. Talon gets annoyed and questions if his brother came all the way there just to make him admit he's to blame for his own family's downfall. Dodging the topic, the visitor says he heard Talon is using local beggars to work on the hospital construction. The brother asks if he gives food and shelter in exchange for labor, and Talon explains the project needed manpower and that it improves public safety. The visitor comments on the free food distribution to children, saying he doesn't care if House Fetus wants to act like saints. However, he reveals that what truly worries him is the fact that the first prince wanted all beggars in that region eliminated. Talon stands completely in shock upon hearing the terrifying revelation about the heir's awful extermination plan. Out of patience, Talon says that if his brother came just to waste his time, he should leave, as now he is part of the Fetus family. The older brother asks Talon to think long and hard once more about the whole situation, reminding him that the Count is still his father. Talon turns his gaze away bitterly and replies that his father had already coldly tossed him aside 13 years ago without the slightest hesitation. Meanwhile, Mental walks annoyed through a dark hallway, complaining about the endless and exhausting preparations for the sacred ritual. She acknowledges that the Tina's ritual is very important, but questions how much longer she'll have to stay locked in that underground sanctuary. The princess keeps complaining, saying spending the whole day isolated in that place with only servants for company is driving her crazy. Suddenly, she bumps right into a woman appearing in the middle of the path, getting a big jump from the sudden encounter. Upon recognizing who the woman before her is, Mental calls her Your Majesty, while the Empress is surprised to see her own daughter there. Mental greets her mother and asks if she went there just to see her, but the Empress wants to know if the princess was planning on stepping out now. The Empress warns that preparations were still supposed to be happening in the prayer room, and Mental mockingly asks if her mother is worried. The mother replies that she does worry since she's her blood daughter, and confesses she lives anxious, fearing the young girl might make a severe mistake. Mental finds the attitude unusual and suggests the two have tea outdoors together to enjoy the day, since it's been a while since they did that. The Empress declines and says she needs to meet the Emperor urgently, advising the princess to return to her post immediately. Seeing her mother walk away in a rush, Mental finds the excuse weird, knowing that with the ritual so close, the Emperor should be inside the castle. She wonders if her mother lied, or if something urgent really came up, lamenting that her mind-reading skills don't work on relatives. Mental stays quiet for a moment with a suspicious look, trying to figure out what her mother is really hiding from her. Without many options to investigate at the moment, the princess decides to turn around and return to the dark depths of the sanctuary. In another corner of the forest, a small squirrel falls from a tree, emitting a frantic sound of panic upon losing its balance. The tiny animal tries to hold on every way possible to nearby branches and leaves to cushion the sudden drop. Lon reverts to his human form, leaning against a tree trunk, coughing heavily, but relieved to have made it out of that situation alive. He analyzes his power and concludes the ability is way weirder than he thought, as he can even merge different species of animals. Lon walks stumbling through the woods and reflects on the massive potential of this ability, suspecting there must be a high price to pay. Sweating heavily, he wonders if using the power shortens his life or something similar. Unable to understand why his body feels so sick all of a sudden, feeling an intense, feverish burn throughout his whole body, the young prince can't resist the extreme weakness and collapses passed out in the middle of the woods. A short time later, a small squirrel appears at the spot and approaches Lan's body, letting out a confused squeak seeing him sprawled on the ground. The little rodent starts smacking the passed-out prince's head several times in an attempt to make him regain consciousness somehow. The squirrel leaps back and inspects the fine bump it just left on the top of the guy's head after hitting him multiple times. It crosses its tiny paws and stares at the guy with an extremely serious and suspicious expression, as if evaluating the situation. The little creature mentally seems to question if the human really passed out for real or if he's just putting on some dumb drama. It looks at the stretched-out figure on the forest floor and mentally laments how that guy manages to be such a weak and fragile fellow. Suddenly, the squirrel hears a scary noise coming from behind the bushes and jumps startled, widening its eyes in terror. A giant beast with sharp fangs and massive teeth emerges roaring in an extremely threatening way before the small rodent. Annoyed by the racket, the squirrel charges fearlessly and starts slapping the beast's snout, telling the monster to zip it because the human is sleeping. The giant wolf begins whimpering, scared, and the squirrel complains that it's being way too petty for still holding a grudge over past silliness. The beast lies on the ground, completely submissive, while the small rodent points toward the unconscious prince right beside it. Facing that hilarious scene of the giant wolf totally surrendered, the squirrel can't hold back its laughter and starts cracking up over the comical situation. The giant wolf stands completely terrified, seeing the small rodent laughing uncontrollably at its face in a mocking way. While the two interact in the clearing, Lan keeps sleeping deeply on the ground without the slightest clue of what is going down. Suddenly, a glowing, mysterious figure emerges before the wolf, stating that that young prince is the human they had been waiting for so long. The massive wolf raises its head toward the sky and lets out a loud, grand howl that echoes across the whole forest region. The howl's sound spreads rapidly, putting birds in a full state of alert on nearby tree branches. The divine figure orders the wolf to spread the news to absolutely every animal in the forest as soon as the right time arrives. The entity of pure light reinforces the order, saying to inform everyone that the one they so awaited has finally made his appearance. It observes the lying prince and comments that he is still very weak, and that's why he sleeps, but warns that this rest won't last long. The next day, the forest routine carries on peacefully with a family of wild boars quietly feeding in the middle of the woods. Far away, in the imperial capital, some nobles gossip outraged upon discovering House Fetus opened a beggar shelter right next to the hospital. Telos tells his brother that that looks like a direct mockery, but Rasha coldly counters that insect plagues remain just insects. Rasha complains with disdain that those beggars are useless folks who wouldn't withstand a single hit from his manas, getting furious just thinking about the situation. He regrets that the beggars should have been eliminated a long time ago, when suddenly a servant arrives running and greets them frightened. Second Prince Dido approaches with a friendly smile, saying it was a happy coincidence bumping into his two brothers around there. Dido showers Rasha with praises for his spectacular performance in that week's ritual, asking how he manages to control such an amazing manas. Dido praises that the two heirs will surely guide the empire's bright future, and Rasha agrees with a tone of pure arrogance and superiority. Rasha smiles falsely and comments he will feel deep sadness when he takes the throne, as he won't be able to see his dear brother easily. He explains he will send Dido to fulfill dangerous duties on the empire's borders, leaving the second prince completely tense and terrified. Dido covers up the panic and accepts the order, following the cruel imperial tradition that orders the new emperor to exile siblings to avoid throne disputes. Kelos finds humor in the situation, mockingly thinking about his brother's fate, who will spend the rest of his life isolated on the kingdom's arid borders. As Dido walks off crushed, it becomes clear that Rasha's plan is to banish absolutely all his blood siblings from the capital, except one. Kelos comments that his brother didn't need to be so direct so soon, but Rasha replies it's much better for the poor guy to know his future once and for all. Kelos jokingly suggests Rasha hand over his advisor post if he feels sorry, and Rasha laughs, saying he'd love to drop the hard work. Changing topics, Rasha asks if his brother thought of the plan against that insolent, glasses-wearing acting leader who took charge of House Fetus. Telos gives a cynical smile to the crown prince and casually replies he found the idea excellent for their plan. He adds with a mean look that pulling that against Talon will be way more fun than spending a whole year in the palace doing nothing. In another carriage, Talon travels focused and plans to secure rights to a rich, recently discovered iron mine on Baron Jones's southern lands. He orders Assistant Pale to use the Baron's old debts and interest with the Fetus House to seize operational control of the iron mine. Talon asks about the situation of his construction workers, and Pale reports that the number of dropouts temporarily spiked right after the speech. The assistant adds saying things have already stabilized as work progressed, and Talon tells him to keep monitoring reactions closely. Pale takes the chance to deliver an urgent notice received early in the morning, coming straight from Talon's biological family estate, the Crisis. Talon reads the message and stays in complete silence upon discovering that his father, the Count, was officially locked up in the Imperial dungeons. He finds the arrest timing precise, as it happens on the exact day he must attend the Noble Council by royal family invite. He reflects that he hasn't done anything to annoy royalty so far, and begins suspecting that this whole targeting is due to the beggar shelter. Talon wonders if the Empire will start tightening the leash around his neck from all sides, just because he dared challenge the rules of the game. Pale notices the massive tension in his master's gaze and asks if he's okay, but Talon tries to brush it off, saying not to pay mind to it. The assistant offers headache medicine, but Talon declines to avoid getting sleepy, commenting that the palace garden is absurdly vast. Stepping down from the vehicle, Talon's arrival as acting leader of House Fetus is loudly announced by Imperial guards at the hall entrance. He walks head held high through the palace's grand hall, completely ignoring judging looks from dozens of nobles around. Talon maintains a firm, flawless posture without showing the slightest intimidation before the nasty whispers filling the room. Pompous Duke Emilio approaches with a sarcastic smile, saying it's a huge pleasure to finally meet the much-talked-about acting leader. He praises the grand project in the heart of the empire, but Talon coldly replies that it's all thanks to the grace of Priest Vesper and the royal family. The Duke laughs loudly and comments his son told him how imposing Talon looked beside the priest in front of the crowd in the central district. He keeps talking with a tone of pure mockery, mockingly bringing up the late Duke Agony fetus with a sarcastic smile on his face. The nasty comment makes Talon extremely furious inside, but he makes an effort to stay calm and not lose control in front of everyone. The Duke pats his shoulder and tells him to focus on educating Heir Flynn well, so the boy doesn't turn into a traitor like his late father. Talon doesn't take the insult sitting down and asks if by son the Duke refers to young Lord Emilio, who was in the district that same day. He reveals the guy was hiding in the crowd like a hooded rat as if he were a traitor, mocking the education provided by his family. The Duke loses his composure and curses him furiously, but Talon stays calm and mentions he heard he recently opened a large blacksmith shop in the region. He warns the iron mine will soon belong to the fetus house and threatens to cut all ore supply if the Duke doesn't stop provoking him there. Duke Emilio stands in total shock over Talon's audacity to suggest his family's business would end up in a bad spot due to lack of ore. Talon calmly steps away and advises the Duke to watch his own words better, reminding him that is neither the time nor the place for provocations. Suddenly, the guard announces for everyone to rise and prepare, as first and second prince have just entered the room. The nobles lower their heads immediately in a sign of deep respect and reverence before the royal authorities. Crown Prince Rasha and Second Prince Dito walk solemnly toward their featured seats in the center of the hall. Facing Rasha, Talon mentally questions if that cold-hearted man really feels zero remorse after trying to eliminate the former duke. The throne heir sweeps his cold, imposing gaze across the entire imperial council, analyzing each noble present. Under the room's extremely thick and intimidating atmosphere, Talon feels massive pressure and swallows hard, trying to keep calm. Rasha orders everyone to take their proper seats, declaring that day's Imperial Council officially underway. They kick off the day's discussions and first decide to wrap up pending issues related to the kingdom's borders once and for all. Finally, Rasha brings up the controversial Central District project and asks House Fetus about the current progress of its work. Talon quickly rises at the ready and steps forward before everyone to start reading his official report. He reports that the hospital structure is advanced and that beggar, shelter, and medical training projects are also progressing. Rasha cuts him off, faking remembering a detail from the past, when he won the lands around the temple as a reward for winning the hunting festival. The prince accuses the former duke of stealing his development rights for that region, questioning if the hospital is the result of that. Hiding his displeasure, Rasha comments he heard reports that public safety in the capital improved quite a bit with House Fetus's new measures. Selos chimes in with a sarcastic smile and agrees, saying Empire citizens are already singing praises to House Fetus everywhere. Rasha begins clapping slowly and rhythmically, catching the attention of every noble present at the council table. The heir stands up and praises the acting leader's work, cynically stating that his expectations for him will only rise. He jabs at other useless nobles by saying a dedicated and active family like House Fetus truly deserves full backing from royalty. Talon covers up his concern and replies he feels honored, promising to carry on the work under full responsibility of his house. Suddenly, Rasha appears behind Talon and rests a hand on his shoulder, whispering that mere humility isn't enough to fill one's belly. The prince whispers in his ear that he can't step into the project by royal decree, but notes managing it all alone must be too heavy for one family. He offers financial and logistical support for the work, suggesting House Fetus merely needs to make a simple request to receive full backing from the Empire. Talon feels a chill and panics remembering the dark past and terrible consequences coming with accepting favors from the royal family. Deciding to play the Crown Prince's dangerous game, Talon bows and reports that the hospital truly struggles with a lack of doctors and gear. He officially asks for the Crown's help in a submissive tone, and Rasha opens a dark smile upon realizing he got what he wanted from House Fetus. Outside the Imperial Hall's large window, a crow with glowing eyes observes the entire scene carefully and without making noise. The bird, actually Prince Lan transformed, reflects that he ended up out of the loop on palace plans from spending so much time in the forest. Noticing his brother's cowardly tricks against Talon, Lan asks himself if it isn't past time to start setting order and discipline around there. The noble council comes to an end, and all participants begin stepping out quietly from the imperial palace's grand courtyard. Approaching his carriage, Talon is greeted by Assistant Pale, who asks worriedly what ended up happening inside during the meeting. Talon coldly replies and orders both to return immediately to the ducal residence without wasting time on explanations. Before he can enter the vehicle, his brother Ego pops up behind him and provocatively asks if he's leaving so soon. Ego comments he already knows about the deal, revealing he heard First Prince Rasha promised full support for the hospital work. The older one says Talon should be grateful for the royal favor, revealing that thanks to this alliance, their father, the Count, will be freed from the dungeon soon. Talon stares at him firmly and flatly replies that the only reason he accepted the prince's help was to protect House Fetus's interests. Leaving no room for chat, Talon gets into the carriage while Ego suggests he use the chance to visit their father at the family estate. Alone in the carriage, Talon bites his lips in anger, remembering the two were never close enough to be acting in that friendly way. Outside the palace, Princes Rasha and Salos laugh out loud, remembering the clear desperation stamped on Talon's face during the deal. Rasha mocks, saying the face he pulled begging for help was priceless, as if the hospital project had been snatched from him again. Kelos plans to sabotage the work little by little under the guise of offering help, and Racia agrees laughing, suggesting destroying the hospital right before completion. Telos finds the idea excellent, pointing out that if something goes wrong with the project, the blame and accountability will fall entirely on Talon's shoulders. Next, Kelos suggests heading to a private spot to plan the next steps in detail, but Rasha hesitates and suddenly declines. The Crown Prince gives a dry cough of exhaustion and suggests leaving that important business discussion for another time. Rasha says goodbye, mentioning he prefers going to rest in his private quarters to recharge, leaving his younger brother quite confused. Kelos watches his brother walk away in a rush and feels quite intrigued by that sudden shift in behavior. The prince thinks about how his brother has been spending way too much time locked in his own room lately and starts suspecting something is wrong there. Shortly after, in Crown Prince Racia's room, we see his door handle turning slowly as he enters. Rasha enters complaining that his great mood was ruined by knowing he'll have to see that unwanted guy's face again inside his room. He gets a terrible scare coming face to face with Prince Lan sitting comfortably in his own desk chair, waiting for him. Rasha yells, demanding to know how Lan managed to get in there again, and the MC realizes from the reaction that the council meeting went very well. Racia turns his gaze away annoyed and tells him to get today's healing treatment done once and for all so he can rest in peace. However, Lan stands up and mentions that before starting the healing process, he has a small personal favor to ask his older brother. Lan asks if the heir can now step into the fetus work, and Rasha stands totally in shock upon realizing he already knows every single detail. Rasha tries to justify himself, saying he just wants the project to go well, but Lan counters that it's precisely that go well part that worries him. Lan reveals he wants to delay the work as much as possible, to buy time for everyone in the Empire to believe royalty backs House Fetus. Rasha stares at him completely shocked, unable to understand why Lan is asking for something that goes against their interests. Looking out the window, Lan confesses he expected Talon to do something different to lead the clan, not that he would build a hospital. He recalls that in the original story, the leader was supposed to raise an army, concluding fate was altered because Talon himself changed. Losing control, Rasha unleashes his elemental power in fury and yells, asking how long he'll have to obey a black-haired bastard like him. Lan observes his brother's fit of rage without showing the slightest concern, mocking that being obedient is actually Rasha's only specialty. He stares at him with a cold, threatening look, disdainfully saying Razia is nothing more than a simple puppet pulled by the second prince. The throne heir stands completely frozen in panic, hearing that painful truth thrown in his face by the MC. Lan warns he's already tired of that whole show and tells his brother to answer quickly if he understood his orders or if he'll have to repeat them. Back at the fetus office, Tolan's pen glides quickly across the paper while he writes his notes with a furrowed brow. He keeps working incessantly late into the night, trying to ignore the physical and mental exhaustion piled up from that tense day. Tolan reflects on Rasha's backing, knowing it only means the Imperial Palace turned its attention back onto them in a dangerous way. He's certain the throne heir's move is actually an evil plan to crush House Fetus and stop them from growing again. He ponders if he should seek backing in advance, but concludes it's still too early and that for now he just needs to watch how everything unfolds. He remembers with resentment Rasha's fake, friendly words at the council, pretending to feel honored to join such a noble project. Talon also recalls the cynical, tight handshake that sealed that terrible and dangerous commitment between them in the hall for good. The memory of the Crown Prince's sadistic look, whispering that he would show him something memorable, keeps echoing darkly in Talon's mind. He remembers Rasia's scary promise about what true royal family support actually means in practice for the fetus house. The memory of that moment leaves the young leader extremely distressed, making cold sweat pour down his tense face in the office. Unable to bear the weight of carrying that lie alone, Talon drops his pen onto the desk and lets out a groan of pure pain and frustration. He squeezes his chest tight, feeling an agonizing pain of anxiety from all the terrifying responsibility sitting on his shoulders. Gritting his teeth, he asks himself if that pain is guilt for failing the late Duke, or fear of also failing to protect young Flynn. He recalls his former master's figure and feels lost, not knowing how to act or how he'll be able to face him after making such questionable decisions. However, gathering his last bit of strength, Talon recovers his resolute stance and swears to himself he will do absolutely everything to protect young Flynn. Suddenly, knocks on the door startled Talon, while a child's voice calls out asking if he's inside. Young Duke Flynn timidly enters and asks if he can come in, commenting it's been very hard to see him lately. Talon falls into mild panic and tries to stop the boy from entering, saying right now is not appropriate at all. He pauses and stares at Flynn thoughtfully for a moment in complete silence. Talon apologizes to the little boy and explains that unfortunately he's handling extremely urgent matters right now. Young Duke Flynn is left outside the closed office, while Talon promises he will visit him as soon as the situation calms down. Somewhere else, the loud sound of metal chains echoes through a dark spot, and someone screams begging for help. Bound by chains, Duke Agony Fetus pretends to be just a regular old man and desperately begs them to release him from there. He complains he's been locked in that cell for over 2 months and questions how long they plan to keep him locked up. One of the local elders talks with Laytel and confirms they still have no clue how that man managed to enter the cave. Laytel reports they found the prisoner already passed out in the middle of the cave and that so far he refuses to reveal how he got in. The Duke yells, annoyed that he lost his balance, fell off a cliff, and simply woke up inside the cave when he opened his eyes. The temple guards claim the place is blessed by the goddess Amica, refusing to believe his entry was a mere coincidence. The elder strokes his beard worried, thinking that if he's lying, the Empire might discover the spot and invade the sacred temple. Laytel notes the prisoner is strong for his age and coldly suggests gouging his eyes out or cutting his heels to prevent escapes. The Duke enters genuine panic and begs for mercy, using the excuse that he has a small son waiting for him at home. The elder remains thoughtful before the prisoner's desperate plea. In a cold tone, the temple leader says he feels sorry for the outsider, but makes it clear he will never leave that sanctuary alive. The Duke breaks into a cold sweat, hearing that by the goddess Amica's mercy, he will receive only 2 fate choices. The elder explains the first option is spending the rest of his days locked up there, and the second is accepting immediate death. He asks what the prisoner will decide to pick facing 2 such cruel alternatives. To everyone's surprise in the cave, Duke Agony starts laughing out loud in an uncontrolled way. The Duke tells the elder to stop playing around and says it's better for them to stop wasting each other's time. He stares at him with a serious look, stating he's way too old to fall for such a dumb threat like that. Ladle observes the prisoner's brave reaction and asks what exactly he means by that. With a confident smile on his face, the Duke reveals he's completely certain they don't have permission to eliminate him. If you want the next part, like and comment.